Hi, I'm Tanic Sims 2, but you can call me Tanny, and after a longer than planned hiatus, we are finally heading to Bluewater Village for the 5th installment of the How Corrupt Is Neighbourhood Anyway series. As we've learnt from the previous episodes, most neighbourhoods shipped with The Sims 2 come pre-packaged with a free trial of hood corruption and overall funkiness in varying degrees. You know, just as a treat. And this series aims to both cover any issues as well as demystify corruption and clarify what is and what isn't corruption, because sometimes a glitch is just a glitch, or the result of an oversight in development. As always, just to recap, hood corruption occurs when data specific to a neighbourhood is not properly assigned or contained, leading to problems down the line that can manifest in surprising but interesting ways. All that being said, now let's finally get this series back in business and find out how corrupt is Bluewater Village anyway. Bluewater Village is the subhood added with the 3rd expansion pack Open for Business and serves as an example of a shopping district. It is the home of 7 pre-created families and, much like the main hoods where other pre-made families reside, along with these playable Sims, of course, come a handful of ancestors. In the 3 base game hoods, the ancestors could be particularly problematic, presumably because they weren't supposed to be playable beyond appearing as portraits in a family tree or references in Sims memories. In-game resurrection was not introduced until the 1st expansion pack University, and the subhood included with the 2nd EP Nightlife appeared to set the precedent for ancestors in upcoming neighbourhoods. Fully or theoretically fully resurrectable Sims whose data allowed them to be functional enough to tempt curious players into uncovering their stories without the need for fiddling in fan-made third-party programs. By the time Open for Business was released, the novelty of necromancy had yet to wear off, and the new gallery of greyed out portraits must surely have been tempting for players, especially if the expectation was that they would be intact and fully resurrectable without too many issues now that in-game resurrection was possible. So this was the case with Bluewater Village ancestors, right? Well, the good news is that, despite none of them having graves, all Bluewater Village ancestors are marked as linked, indicating their data is there, at least there enough for them to be resurrected and brought back into the realm of the playables, if a player so chooses. Most of the ancestors even have memories, albeit basic ones, something that the majority of unplayable base game ancestors lacked. Heck, some of them even have more memories than actually playable Sims in this neighbourhood. But we'll get onto that later. The Tinker, Landgrab, Ramirez, and Larson ancestors are all fine and are most likely completely safe to resurrect. Although, fun fact, Alvin Larson's aspiration bar is in the bottom red, and he will go into aspiration failure upon resurrection, possibly because of his wife Elisa's death. The Della Rosas, Jacques, and Geeks, however, are a little shredded. Their conditions are quite reminiscent of the buggiest Sims buried in Olive's garden, even right down to one of the ancestors, namely the father of Denise and grandfather of Gilbert Jacques, Sebastian Jeffers, having a randomized hairstyle when resurrected. All of these Sims have no personalities, no aspirations, no memories, and, most peculiarly, are all flagged as being adult males, even if their thumbnail depicts an elder man or woman. Meaning if a player wanted to, say, reunite Chester's parents, Lucy and Carl Geek, the game will consider them as a gay couple. It also means the animations and voices are consistent with adult males, which was surely a surprise for many players. So what could have caused these Sims to seemingly resort back to a default state, essentially corrupting their data and losing some basic aspects of what makes a Sim, well, a Sim? Perhaps the answer lies within their Sim description records in the neighbourhood, or more specifically in their person data. Most basic information about a Sim, such as their personality, aspiration, and age, can be accessed through their person data. In SimPE, a Sim's person data can be viewed via their Open Sim description under Extended Browser in the More tab. What appears to have happened to these unfortunate ancestors is that almost every value in their person data has been reset to 0 somehow. Characteristics like personality, skills, and interests are not binary and can range from 0 to 1000. So the zeros in these fields are interpreted by the game as nothing, hence their blank personalities, or technically extreme personalities, if you want to be pedantic, and trust me, I absolutely do. Gender, on the other hand, is treated as a binary variable in The Sims 2. 0 represents male, whereas 1 represents female. This is why they are all recognized as male Sims in-game. Though the Sims Wiki states these ancestors have the power aspiration that was scrapped in development long before the base game's release, in keeping with the other re-zeroed values in their person data, the value for aspiration is also 0, which more accurately would represent no aspiration at all. For reference, the power aspiration does actually have its own unique value of 8, as evidenced by 5 deceased Sims in Veronaville, who are the only premade Sims confirmed to have this removed aspiration. However, the gameplay for missing aspirations is similar to and equally as buggy as the power aspiration, presumably due to its incomplete coding. Since lifetime wants were only introduced with the first expansion pack University, there are no lifetime wants associated with the power aspiration. Similarly, a Sim with no aspiration cannot have a lifetime want either. Sims with no aspiration seem to roll generic wants that soon run out, while Power Sims wants are often a fusion of popularity and fortune wants that tend to re-roll repeatedly. The aspiration levels for both power and no aspiration take their names from the romance aspiration, until it reaches bottom red, when it just gives up apparently and shows a blank level instead. When a Sim with either power or no aspiration goes into aspiration failure, they do not have a thought bubble showing the aspiration icon, since the power icon is hidden away in the game files and, well, there wouldn't be an icon for a missing aspiration. After the therapist has visited, the game will throw an error because it's tried to check to see which aspiration flag has been set for the Sim through accessing their person data, only for all the checks to return false and thus hit an error, literally hit breakpoint primitive, which instructs the script to stop running and return an error instead, since it can't continue, leading to the Sim resetting. Even if a Sim with no aspiration is in platinum, aspiration rewards will fail as if the Sim were in red. I could also not access the aspiration rewards tab unless I went through a Sim with an aspiration first due to the missing icon. Lastly, the game will also have problems with calculating attraction score for Sims with no aspiration, but more on that later. As for the ambiguous ages, admittedly this discrepancy in their person data did stump me at first. Rather than 0, the age field contains the value 13 in hex or 19 in decimal. 13 represents the adult life stage in person data. The absolute minimum a Sim's age can be here is 1, which represents babies. Out of curiosity, I decided to test things out by creating a sim and changing the age field in their person data to 0. Immediately, their life stage was listed as unknown in SimPE. This is the same situation poor little Knut Futer is in. His age is 0, life stage unknown, and think how irrevocably balked he is. So I figured it would be impossible for a sim to have no value for age, at least not in their person data. This theory does appear to be correct. When I tried loading the household with this Knutified sim, it wasn't surprising that I was hit with an infinite loading screen. However, by pure chance one day I was reading through old error logs unrelated to this video and noticed at the bottom it said current sim age equals 0, referencing an adult sim. While I'm hesitant to declare that I've cracked the code for certain, it does seem to be a little too coincidental that there is at least one place in the game that links 0 to the adult life stage. It could be totally unrelated, but if it is indeed true that the game uses 0 to represent the adult life stage somewhere, then perhaps this could be the answer as to why these elder ancestors are treated as adults in the game. The data stored in their individual user files, such as their material definitions and age data, appear to be correct, which may explain why their thumbnails do not reflect their supposed statuses as adult males, and instead show their actual appearances. Whatever has happened to them most likely happened on a neighbourhood level, rather than directly messing up their character files. This makes sense since person data can be accessed through a sim's neighbour ID or nID, which is stored in the neighbourhood package. Most checks for attributes like gender or age, for example, are done through a sim's person data rather than trying to access their user file. Although these ancestors are highly relatable with their ambiguous genders and lack of aspiration, it's unlikely that this was intentional and appears to be caused by some sort of data loss. It's impossible to say for sure what exactly happened. However, we do know that Sim's person data being wiped and becoming zeros across the board is a pretty common phenomenon. This can happen if there is a problem saving the neighbourhood, like a crash for example, or potentially from hitting the file limit in macOS. And I personally unintentionally managed to replicate this bug when I merged several neighbourhood backup folders together, as did fellow YouTuber CrystalFlame360. Interestingly, when sorted by nID or instance number of their sim description records in SimPE, the ancestors affected by this blank slating are grouped together, implying they were created around the same time as each other, while the ancestors with normal data were created afterwards. Perhaps something like a bad save or other issue happened during Bluewater Village's development that went unnoticed, which is understandable considering the affected Sims are intended to be deceased. And maybe it's better these ones stay that way. Meet Me to the River, who created her own clean Bluewater Village template that fixed these ancestors, advises against resurrecting them in the shipped Maxis template. As long as they are left to rest in peace, they are unlikely to cause any problems. But it does seem that this handful of ancestors are not the only Sims in Bluewater Village who fell victim to the curse of re-zeroed person data. You may have noticed that sandwiched between the broken ancestors are two sim description records belonging to Sims who aren't deceased. In fact, they are female townie children named Jeannie and Elle. Or rather, they are supposed to be female townie children. Despite their appearances being that of a female child, Jeannie and Elle's person data seem to have suffered the same fate as some of the Bluewater Village ancestors, so they are also treated by the game as being adult males with no personality or aspiration. Their interests will be randomized in game since they have no set ones. Jeannie and Elle's recognized state as adult males is a bit more noticeable than with the deceased elder Sims, because they will seemingly float or hover off the ground, since the game is getting the information that they are adult male Sims, and so they need to do adult male animations, only these are incompatible with the child mesh. As well as having an adult career tab instead of the school tab available for children, Jeannie and Elle have pretty much all the capabilities of adult male Sims, as Moni found out. While that's odd, surprising, unusual, disturbing, take your pick, again it's highly unlikely this was intentional. Assuming they didn't inherit any potentially deleted Sims numbers, Jeannie and Elle's nIDs suggest they were generated around the same time the ancestors were being created. While playable and ancestral Sims are created through means like Create a Sim, townies and NPCs spawn when needed, so perhaps Jeannie and Elle generated while the first batch of ancestors in Bluewater Village were being created, and whatever happened in development that led to some of the ancestors' person data defaulting to 0 affected Jeannie and Elle too. Like with the deceased Sims, it's possible Jeannie and Elle's balkage went unnoticed, since they were intended to be townies. Moreover, they are in the default household, which is essentially the shadow realm of The Sims 2, as it is home to deceased Sims and object NPCs. So the ancestors are exactly where they should be, but Jeannie and Elle as townies should be in the townie household. Since the default household's family instance number is always 0 in every neighbourhood, perhaps this could explain why Sims who suffer from re-0 person data end up shoved into the default household. If a Sim's person data indicates their household is 0, then this matches the instance number of the default household. In my replication of the bug, the Sim State University Sims, strays, and some unfortunate randomly generated townies were moved into the default family too, so Jeannie and Elle's banishment to the default household checks out. Their placement in the default household also means that essentially they are hidden from view, and most players would probably be unaware of their existence, unless they used fan-made tools and mods or cheat objects like the Tombstone of Life and Death and happened to find their names. In Meet Me to the River's clean template, Jeannie and Elle have been deleted using the deleted to method. While their funkiness is contained within their own sim descriptions, meaning they are unlikely to cause any widespread hood corruption, it's recommended that Jeannie and Elle are left alone if playing with the original Max's template due to their bugginess. If a player runs Hood Checker after adding the original Bluewater Village to their neighbourhood, they will be greeted by a stack of incorrect subject instance errors under memories. I covered the reason for this error in more depth in the downtown video, but since it's been a while, we're probably due a recap. Every memory needs a subject, whether this is an object or a sim. Sims are referenced in memories in multiple ways, one of which being via their nID. This is the instance number of their sim description records and the subject instance in question. Before Bluewater Village, or any subhood actually, is attached to a primary neighbourhood, it exists in its own template where each sim has a unique nID that is referenced in any and all pre-existing memories about Sims, including gossip memories. However, due to the nature of the sim creation index, the subhood Sims nIDs will change upon being added to this playable hood. While the game does successfully update the Bluewater Village Sims GUIDs, another way in which Sims are referenced in memories, under lines 5 and 6 in the raw data of their memories, the nIDs in line 12 remain the same as they were in the original Bluewater Village template of B001, but these numbers won't belong to them anymore. Thus, the subject instance referenced in every single memory about Sims is now incorrect. The only memories that do not have this problem are existing memories about Mystery Sim, since Mystery Sim is an object and thus does not have a valid sim description, meaning there can't be a subject instance for it. Because these memories were created before Bluewater Village's addition to a main neighbourhood, cosmetically they appear fine in game, despite technically pointing to a completely different sim or possibly no valid sim at all behind the scenes. Hence the warnings in Hood Checker. The creator of Hood Checker, Mutilda, described these memories as being corrupted since the data may be incorrect or invalid, although they are pretty much harmless and, in Bluewater Village's case, not noticeable, since there aren't any sims waiting on generating any sort of new memory using outdated information, like the case of the Triku family and their mysterious inheritances. Moreover, Hood Checker can easily fix the memories so they correctly reference the intended nID for the subject instance, matching the sim's updated subject GUIDs. Since this is a problem with all subhoods, it will be included in all future subhood installment episodes, mostly just as a clarification for worried Hood Checker users who may think these warnings mean their hood's doomed, when really it's just Sims 2 memories doing what they do best. Get a little confused sometimes. As far as the game's concerned, the father of Gilbert, Yves Jacquet, or Saviour Jacquet in it, is very much dead. He has an I am dead token and all the appropriate ghost flags, so there's no doubt the game properly recognises that he is not alive. But his should-be widow Denise seems to disagree, or is in pretty severe denial because she doesn't understand her husband's gone. Denise has no memory about Yves' death, or really, Denise has absolutely no memories at all. This means that she has no memory of having a first kiss, so this interaction will become available to her. Similarly, she doesn't remember trying for a baby, despite having a whole son right there. Not that she even remembers giving birth to him either though. Because Denise essentially seems to have no idea Yves is dead, she fears Yves cheating when the Jacquet household is loaded for the first time, and any romantic interaction with other Sims will result in Denise believing she is having an affair. Ordinarily, engagement and marriage flags are removed upon a Sim's death, though this is not always the case with premade Sims, possibly so widowed or deceased couples can stay connected in family trees for storytelling purposes. However, this usually does not prevent premade Sims from moving on and remarrying, like in the case of Dina Caliente, the widow of Michael Batchelor, and the game's prompt for the player to get her engaged and then married to Mortimer Goth. But what's odd about Denise is that she seems pretty adamant she's still married to Yves, meaning she won't be able to get engaged or remarry at all. So like most other deceased or half-deceased premade married couples, Denise and Yves still appear married in the Jacquet family tree. But if this is the case for some other premade Sims, how come Dina or Olive, for example, are able to remarry without issue? At first, the main difference appeared to be the fact that Denise has absolutely no recollection of her husband's death, whereas other widowed premades do. They may also have the presence of their grave on their lot. I attempted to test this theory out by creating a married couple and killing one of the spouses, then removed the living spouse's memory of the death, before editing their relationship and family ties in SimPE so their marriage could be restored. I also moved their grave and deleted the new subject died memory that generated as a result. Sure enough, they became connected in the family tree again, and the widowed spouse gained a memory of having an affair when interacting romantically with another sim. The problem though was that the widow was seemingly still aware of her husband's death and did not roll a fear of catching her deceased husband cheating like Denise. She did fear falling out of love with him, but this seems to be an unrelated bug since myself and other players have experienced this with family aspiration sims through normal gameplay. So I decided to give it another go, and I went through the same process as before, except I had one sim die on another lot, so their spouse did not witness their death. The results were pretty much the same. The widow thought she was cheating, but while she was still considered married to her deceased husband, she annoyingly was aware he was deceased and rolled once to resurrect him, despite the deleted memory of his death, since she still gained one because of pesky psychic family memory distribution. I also tried changing her aspiration to fortune to match Denise's to see if this could help her roll the same fear of catching her deceased spouse cheating. Alas, this was not successful, and I conceded that I was unable to replicate the exact conditions of Denise's issue. This bug, where death does not do a married couple apart, can sometimes happen for whatever reason, as with the unchecking and checking of random relationship flags. But then, just when I was ready to give up on providing an adequate explanation as to why Denise and Eve's marriage was basically still intact, I finally noticed what was different between Denise and other widowed premades. Dina and Michael, Olive and Ichabod, and Consort and Contessa, among others, may have their relationships with each other defined as spouses in both sim relations and family ties, but they did not actually have the married flag ticked, meaning they could still be connected in family trees, but the living spouse would be allowed to remarry. Denise and Eve, on the other hand, do have the married flag tick still, hence Denise cannot remarry. In hindsight, the answer seemed pretty obvious, but hey, I like sharing the process of my investigations, if only so my incompetence can entertain you all. Luckily, there are several ways to fix Denise, so that she can properly recognize that she is no longer married in the eyes of sim lore. Summoning Eve via cheats or mods onto the Jacquet's lot will give Denise a memory of his death, and their marriage can be cleared with sim PE. Pescado's lot debugger or batbox should also have an option to fix dead romances that will clear the marriage flags between Denise and Eve. Alternatively, Meet Me to the River's clean template has already cleared the flags, as well as adding a basic set of memories that Denise was lacking, including the memory of Eve's death. Interestingly, Gilbert Jacquet does not have a memory of his father dying either, and instead only has the usual fresh out of cast mystery sim memories, typical for single adult sims. But Gilbert does not seem to have any problem accepting Eve is dead despite this, so it's probable that something has gone a little wrong with the marriage flags and spousal connection. That, or he just isn't concerned with his father's whereabouts. The Jacquet's lack of memories is also more likely to be symptomatic of an impending deadline rather than a sign of impending doom. So, although I cannot say for certain that Denise's lack of memory about Eve's death is the exact reason why she fears catching him cheating, I do hope that I could at least provide some insight into why Denise still recognizes Eve's as her husband for players who may have wanted to remarry her or were just wondering why she has an unusual fear when playing the Jacquet family for the first time. Denise's confusion is not necessarily corruption, or even a massive problem that would render Bluewater Village unplayable, but this isn't the full extent of her bugginess. Over the past few years, numerous players have reported a jump bug or object error when playing or trying to interact with Denise Jacquet, with sims she is attracted to or vice versa being particularly problematic. According to some players, the error typically states that there was a problem with executing the script that calculates the attraction score between Sims. Attraction score was introduced with Nightlife as part of the new chemistry system, but included in all subsequent packs, and its purpose is to calculate the compatibility between two Sims based on several factors from zodiac signs and primary aspirations to personalities and turn-ons and offs. So the attraction score is responsible for determining chemistry, which is represented by lightning bolts in The Sims 2. Rather than being programmed using semantics, the behavior scripting language used exclusively for the first two Sims games and Sims Online, attraction score is calculated through a Lua script, which is a programming language designed to be embedded in other applications, including but of course not limited to The Sims 2. In Lua, a nil value represents the lack of a valid value. This is what the error message attempt to perform arithmetic on field ? A nil value is referring to. If the error looks familiar, that's because this is the exact error that is thrown when a Sim with an invalid aspiration value, in particular 0, tries interacting romantically with another Sim. As mentioned, primary aspirations are an important component necessary for the calculation to be completed, so attraction score can be determined. The script is likely expecting a non-zero valid value for this field, only to not get one, so the script can't continue and instead will throw an error or automatically reset Sims if debug mode is disabled. Having no aspiration means it's impossible for chemistry to be determined, so this can lead to constant jump bugs or object errors even when just hovering over a Sim with no aspiration. But Denise does have an aspiration, so this probably doesn't explain why players may have problems with her specifically. There were a few theories I considered when attempting to reproduce this bug in-game to no avail. At first, I wondered if it could at all be related to the fact that Denise is the widow of a Sim with no aspiration, to whom she presumably was attracted, which could possibly be interfering with Denise becoming attracted to other Sims. However, I was unable to find any evidence to support this theory, and testing these conditions with other newly created Sims proved fruitless. I also found her zodiac sign situation to be interesting, as the Sims wiki states that her zodiac is not recognized in SimPE and the value is listed as 0 in her person data. Initially, I did wonder if a missing zodiac would pose the same problem as a missing or otherwise invalid aspiration, since zodiacs are important in calculating attraction score too. There are a total of 12 possible options from 1 to 12 in decimal, so a value of 0 in the zodiac field would of course be a nil value. However, the game seems able to handle this by assigning the appropriate zodiac that corresponds to the Sim's personality, like in the case of Broken Ancestors' re-zeroed person data becoming cancers in-game. After initializing and saving the JK household, Denise's zodiac was correctly listed as 6 in her person data. Moreover, there are a handful of Sims across both Bluewater Village and the base game hoods whose zodiac signs are unrecognized and marked as 0 in their person data initially according to SimPE. Yet this error does not seem to affect them as far as I could find. Annoyingly, I did have trouble replicating the error in game. I tried having Denise flirt with and become attracted to several men in Bluewater Village, and I even made her a perfect man who should theoretically be the man of her dreams. Still, everything worked as it should should. I had no errors or jump bugs, and any and all romantic interactions were successful. The one time you actually want the game to break, I swear. This could mean the glitch may potentially have been patched out at some point, or it may just have been a one-time error with certain EPs or even mods. Or I was unable to reproduce the exact conditions, particularly when it comes to factors like long-term play. But while I was unable to showcase the glitch and most importantly access error logs specific to Denise's problem so we could get a clearer understanding of where exactly things may go wrong with her, we can still examine logs other players have uploaded to forums where people have replied claiming Denise has given them the same error in their games. Although again, this error is typically caused by a sim losing their aspiration for whatever reason. All that being said, there does actually seem to be an explanation and even a solution for players who may be experiencing this bug with Denise in their games. According to Pescado, this error can in fact occur due to corrupted attraction markers. Attraction markers are invisible tokens that contain information about sims to whom other sims are attracted and trigger romance-related wants. Like most other bits of data, such as tokens and memories, they can just get a little funky sometimes. Though I was unable to hunt down any corrupted tokens that may be present in Denise's memory slot, the recommended fix for Denise and indeed any other sims dealing with this is to clear attraction markers using the bat box. Perhaps her ignorance regarding her husband's death could be a factor for her potentially having bought attraction markers in the first place. However, again, without being able to reproduce the bug in game, it's impossible to conclude what exactly may cause this widespread problem with Denise, or why she's seemingly so susceptible to it. Still, if you have ever experienced this error in your game, I hope this information and suggested fix have been helpful, and your Denise can go and live her best life. While foraging for content in the Bluewater Village template, I noticed quite a few oddities in the sim relations resource. According to SimPE, some sims have relationship flags ticked that are seemingly random and hopefully erroneous, namely family flags checked between sims who should not be related, such as Garbagespace and his townie crushes, Malcolm Landgrab IV and his employees, and even between playable sims like Florence Della Rosa and Garbagespace. None of these relationships are defined, nor are they reflected in the family ties resource, meaning the flags should have no noticeable impact in-game. This is similar to some of the abnormal relationships that can be found in the Strange Town template, like Cersei Beaker apparently recognizing her townie and NPC friends, Abhijit Cho and Meredith Lillard, as family, or even in the case of suspicious and impossible flags that may or may not suggest grunt ancestral sim Mary Mellons and townie Bella Goth allegedly, possibly, potentially could have snapped up the nIDs of improperly deleted first incarnations of Pascal and Laszlo Curious, leading Mary and Bella to inherit the data like sim relations still attached to these previously owned nIDs. If this is an accurate explanation for what's happened in Strange Town, then those weird family flags would be a classic example of what can occur when a sim is improperly deleted and the sim creation index is reset somehow. But is this what happened in Bluewater Village? Originally, it was believed that sims suddenly gaining or even losing certain relationship flags could be a symptom of neighbourhood corruption. However, as briefly mentioned in the previous section, this does appear to be a pretty common glitch. I've even experienced it in my own Pleasantview, where the game just decided that the son of Alexander Goth Dexter was one-sidedly engaged to his first cousin once removed, Isaac Pleasant, whom he'd never even met. The current theory is that the game seems to set random relationship flags even between Sims who have never even met before, and these flags are supposed to be cleared once the Sims properly meet in game. Why this happens exactly is not yet fully understood, but it is likely to be normal game behavior. Sometimes the flags may get stuck and fail to clear, which may be due to Sims meeting in a non-standard way. It's still quite vague as to what meeting in a non-standard way means, but perhaps it could apply to whichever method the developers use to create relationships between premade Sims. To test this, I had playable Sims like Malcolm and the Tinker adults invite over the townie employees they have family flags set with so they could properly meet in-game. I wanted to see if this would remove the flags in SimPE after saving, but it was unsuccessful as the flags remained, possibly since these relationships weren't randomly created through normal gameplay the way players report it in their own games. Notable modders such as Saijon, who has basically made fixes for problems you didn't even know existed, once mentioned that they have experienced Sims both losing and gaining random relationship flags multiple times. However, they were unable to reproduce the bug to conclude what may cause it due to inconsistent patterns. Still, at least in the case of Bluewater Village, these random family flags should not be harmful, and most of all do not affect gameplay. It's much more likely that they are a developmental mistake or a result of a common glitch rather than a sign of anything nefarious. So all in all, they do not seem to be anything to worry about, but they have been included in this video anyway, if only to offer reassurance. We need to talk about the DNA funkiness going on in Bluewater Village. If you thought the poor unfortunate ancestors were broken enough and there couldn't possibly be anything more wrong with them, I am sorry to say that their balkage does not end at their sim descriptions. According to their sim DNA records, the genetic hair colour of the affected ancestors is listed as 5, which is the code representing grey hair. But the bin for grey hair is not genetic, and it's pretty unusual for grey hair to be reflected in sim DNA because it should only be available to elders. To contrast, the unaffected elder ancestors, as well as elder playables in Bluewater Village, and indeed in any neighbourhood, may have their hair expressed as grey in-game due to their age, but the code for their genetic hair colour should be the colour they once had out of 4 options in an unmodded game. 1 is black, 2 is brown, 3 is blonde, and 4 is red. Even elder Sims created in Creator Sim should have DNA that matches the bin chosen by the player, even though their hair will appear as grey. So becoming an elder results in cosmetic grey hair and should not alter a Sim's hair genetics, just like how dyeing hair by changing a Sim's appearance in the mirror does not change their DNA as well. So what's happened here? My hypothesis is that it may somehow be related to their other issues. Sim DNA is not referenced in a Sim's person data and instead is stored in the neighbourhood package under the, Sim DNA resource, though DNA records are connected to a Sim's sim description in that the instance number of the DNA entry will match the instance number of their sim description, which, as established, is their neighbour ID. What I am guessing is that possibly as another result of whatever has happened to them that caused their person data and sim description to be reset to default values, the neighbourhood is also missing the information of their true hair colour. and so the game has to instead go off the hair they are expressing in their appearances, which is of course grey, since they are supposed to be elders according to their appearances and age data. So it seems that this data got lost or somehow deleted, and the game has to do its best to replace it based on the information it still has. I decided to test my theory out by revisiting the Pleasant View I purposely corrupted by merging several backup folders and overwriting neighbourhood files, since that experiment resulted in similar results to the state of the broken Bluewater Village Ancestors sim descriptions. You may remember Corey Phillips from the video documenting the messed up sims and pet sim hybrids, but to recap, since I know it's been a while, Corey Phillips is a randomly generated townie who got caught in the crossfire and suffered the same fate as some of the Bluewater Village ancestors. His sim description got a little bit shredded, possibly deleted and regenerated, and the values in his person data were reset to 0. So despite his appearance as an elder male, he is recognized as an adult male with no aspiration, no personality. You get the picture. Since he is, or rather should be, an elder, I wanted to see if his DNA would take the grey hair bin code from his appearance because his true genetic data may have been missing, like in the case of these ancestors. Interestingly though, when I first tried opening his DNA through his sim description in SimPE, it wouldn't open. And sure enough, when I tried hunting down a SimDNA record with the same instance as his sim description 1B5, there wasn't one. So Corey essentially had no DNA. I initialized him in game and saved the lot, then went to check in SimPE again. This time a SimDNA record for him did exist, and once it opened I saw the magic number I had been hoping for, 5, indicating he too had genetics for grey hair. Similarly, in another experiment I did a while back, I noticed elder sim Michael Batchelor in Pleasant View also had missing DNA, as I was unable to open or find any record for him in SimPE until I loaded him in the game. When I checked SimPE afterwards, he now not only had a SimDNA record, but his hair genes were also, you guessed it, for grey hair. This may have been overkill, but I wanted to further test the theory that the game will use a sim's appearance in the case that their DNA data are lost for whatever reason and need to be replenished. I decided to create 2 parents in Create a Sim with different genes so that they could produce a child with heterozygous genetics. Now, since this video isn't dedicated to untangling the intricacies of DNA in The Sims 2, I won't go too in depth about genetics and how they operate. However, I will try to provide a simplified explanation that's relevant to the next part. Generally, Sims created in Create a Sim will be homozygous for their eye colour, hair colour and skin tone, as are most, if not all, premade Sims and townies. This means that their dominant genes and their recessive genes are identical. In this experiment, father homozygous is homozygous for green eyes, black hair and skin tone 4, while mother Homar is homozygous for brown eyes, red hair and skin tone 1. Their daughter Hetra was created using the Create a Child tool in Create a Sim, so she can receive genetics from both parents. She expresses her father's hair colour and her mother's eye colour, since black hair and brown eyes are dominant and thus are visible, as well as her father's skin tone, although the 4 default skin tones are not treated as dominant or recessive by the game. However, she has also inherited her mother's red hair and her father's green eyes as recessive genes. And while she expresses skin tone 4, she has also received received genetics for skin tone 1 from her mother, meaning she could have expressed any of the 4 possible skin tones. Again, this was all extremely simplified and generalized, particularly where skin tones and skin tone range are concerned. However, the point is that Hetra is heterozygous because her dominant and recessive genes are not identical, and I wanted to see how the game would replace her DNA if it accidentally goes MIA, with my expectation of course being that she will become homozygous based on the dominant genes she is expressing. And this is the only remaining information the game has to go off in order to create a new DNA record for her. Hetra's DNA entry in the neighbourhood went through a terrible accident and now it's missing. Very sad. Following this tragic, unexplainable loss, I went back into the Zygous household to see if the game had regenerated a shiny new DNA record for her. Good news, it had! And even better news, it was different to her original genetics, in that her recessive genes were now identical to her expressed dominant genes. Hetra was now homozygous. While these findings were useful in supporting my thoughts and theories on why the 9 broken ancestors had unusual missing hair genetics, it did lead to some more questions. In the cases of Corey and Michael, it seems their DNA records were missing, and the game needed to generate new records once they were initialized in-game. However, all 9 of the broken ancestors' sim DNA records were readily available, possibly suggesting that if they were deleted or otherwise lost, they may have been given the opportunity to regenerate at some point in development. Jeannie and Elle, on the other hand, do not have DNA records in the Bluewater Village template and will not generate them until they are initialized in-game, despite suffering the same fate as these 9 ancestors. There probably isn't much to it, but I just thought it was interesting. According to Maxoid Tom, the game does have fallback code which should return default DNA in the case that no DNA is found. Though he mentioned this in the context of universal NPCs such as Grim Reaper, perhaps we have observed this fallback code in action through these experiments and observations. Ultimately though, while this unusual DNA could have been caused by whatever messed up these ancestors' sim descriptions, it's not really a problem. They are deceased, and it seems the absolute worst that could happen would be that any new offspring would inherit these genetics for grey hair. The likelihood of a player resurrecting those sims and getting them to reproduce is low, but I mean, if you want to go ahead and do that, then sure, no one's going to stop you. But most importantly, the very existence of this DNA weirdness isn't harmful in itself. When I experimented with Michael Batchelor's DNA, some of his children did inherit his grey hair genetics, but as mentioned earlier, grey hair should only show up on elder sims, so unless a player goes spelunking in SimPE or uses the in-game sim DNA cheat, grey hair DNA isn't noticeable because the children will express a different hair colour instead. Still, the ancestors with missing hair DNA have been given appropriate hair genetics in Meet Me to the River's clean Bluewater Village template, but if genetic accuracy doesn't bother you, or if you just don't intend on putting their DNA to the test, then this is probably not a major issue. I included it all anyway because I just think it could be a neat little side effect of their funky data. Staying on the topic of appearances and DNA, now let's go over some other oddities in Bluewater Village for a segment I like to call Not Corruption, Just Weird. Although, to be honest, they're not really that weird, but they are definitely not related to corruption, and the explanations are quite straightforward. forward. The Sims wiki mentions that Denise and Gilbert Jacquet will have different faces when exported to Body Shop. Apparently they weren't content with having a whole section dedicated to them and needed more publicity. In-game, Denise appears to mostly use the 12 template, and she has quite sharp features, with her cheekbones being particularly chiseled. Her exported appearance, however, is a bit softer and rounder, with more noticeable bags under her eyes. Her full face seems to use the 4th template. As for her son Gilbert, his facial features mostly borrow from the 2nd template and a bit of the 4th template, and he has a slim face with sharp cheekbones similar to his mother's. His jaw is round with a small chin. However, when he is exported to Body Shop, he suddenly gains a pretty gnarly chin that's very pronounced. His cheeks are also rounder. While his eyes are from the 2nd template in both versions, his Body Shop face uses mostly the 8th template with a jaw from the 6th template. In addition, Gilbert's eyebrows will match his dyed hair colour of black, despite having blonde eyebrows in-game because his natural hair colour is blonde. However, this appears to be due to the limitations of Body Shop rather than being related to his different appearance. When looking at Denise and Gilbert's character files in SimPE, you may notice that they have 2 facial structure records. Typically, Sims will only have 1. However, Sims who have had plastic surgery will have 2. The first facial structure with the instance ID of 1 is a Sim's original genetic face that can be passed down, and the second with the instance ID of 2 is the Sim's new face or their actual appearance, to quote Maxoy Tom, since plastic surgery is not genetic. So could Denise and Gilbert have undergone plastic surgery during the development of Bluewater Village? It's possible, and could explain why Denise and Gilbert look different in Body Shop compared to in-game. Before I could be absolutely certain, however, I wanted to test to see if Body Shop favours an exported Sim's first facial structure over the plastic surgery-fied new appearance stored in the 2nd facial structure record. I made a Sim with the first face template, not only so he could fit right in Pleasant View, but also so the change will be more drastic. I gave him plastic surgery and he was very pleased with the result. Now he'd be a perfect pollination technician. I exported him to Body Shop through SimPE, and sure enough, despite the thumbnail depicting his in-game appearance, Body Shop decided it preferred him the way he used to look and ignored his brand new 2nd facial structure. So to summarise, exporting Sims with 2 facial structures like Denise and Gilbert to Body Shop results in a Sim with their original facial data. This absolutely is not related to Corruption. It's not even Corruption's step-fifth cousin twice removed, and is rather a Body Shop quirk than anything weird or scary. It's also what I like to call a remnant of development, much like how the object data for some ancestors in Bluewater Village suggests they originally had different names, such as Carl Geek possibly once being called Bob, or Alvin Larson as Jimmy, or even like how a text list exists for a lot called Autohouse Autobahn that does not appear in the released Bluewater Village. Another appearance-related oddity that isn't relevant to Corruption are the thumbnails for 4 of the townies in Bluewater Village, namely Alan Cho, Robin Larea, Steffi Royce, and Lila Ronick, as they are known in the template, though their names will be randomized in-game. If a player has Nightlife installed, these townies should be wearing outfits that come from Nightlife in-game. However, if you look at their default thumbnails, Alan is instead wearing a green polo shirt, while Lila and Robin wear the same beige tank top, and Steffi wears an orange shirt. These outfits are from the base game and are usually the default clothes when the mesh for the clothes a Sim is supposed to be wearing can't be found. SCID initially theorized that perhaps these clothes originally came from Nightlife but were reintroduced in Open for Business. However, they may not have been properly linked, and so once these 4 townies generated wearing these outfits, their default thumbnail was set, but their clothes were not showing up correctly in them due to a potential linking problem. However, after checking, SCID found that these Nightlife outfits seem to only come with Nightlife and may not have been introduced in Open for Business. It's impossible to say for sure why this has happened, but again, it could just be another remnant of development. Regardless of how this happened though, it's not a big deal, especially if you have Nightlife, and most of all, it's definitely not corruption. The worst case scenario, even if a player didn't have Nightlife, would be that these townies would be wearing a randomized outfit, which isn't really something to worry about. Across the pre-made hoods, there are varying amounts of breadcrumbs suggesting Sims were improperly deleted in development in the form of invalid Sim references and other circumstantial evidence. Some neighbourhoods have enough breadcrumbs for a sandwich, others have a loaf of bread, and then there are some Veronaville with a whole bakery. Since subhoods and stealth hoods do not seem to be an exception to this, let's find out what we are dealing with in Bluewater Village. In this final section, we are going to scour the neighbourhood in an attempt to answer 2 questions. Were Sims improperly deleted in Bluewater Village, and is this a problem? I recommend grabbing a snack or probably even a full 3-course meal because I've dubbed this section as the big boy in my notes, since it is basically its own video within a video. So get ready, get comfortable, and maybe work on that project you've been procrastinating while you listen, because there is a lot to cover. First things first though, it's important that I clarify exactly what I mean by improper sim deletion. April Black recently dropped the most incredible and in-depth technical deep dive into Sims 2 corruption that I highly recommend you go and watch if you haven't already, or even if you have, seriously go watch it again, it's amazing. So I am going to be reiterating a lot of the information and evidence presented by April Black in both their Mod The Sims post and their video. Some of this may be unnecessary in that it might not completely apply to Bluewater Village. However, because I have been inaccurate in past videos, I would like to take this opportunity to correct these mistakes and provide more accurate and updated information. Aside from a certain cheat code, the game does not allow players to hard delete Sims using in-game tools, specifically through the Sim bin. Hard deleting Sims would entail completely and irrevocably erasing the Sim, which would not be a good idea, considering how the game structures neighbourhood data, but we'll talk about that in more detail a bit later. Instead, in-game methods of deleting Sims, such as the infamous bin button in a neighbourhood Sim bin or selling tombstones, perform what is typically known in programming as a soft or logical delete, wherein an entry is not completely removed and instead is just hidden from the application and marked as deleted without actually deleting it, preventing any potential data loss. The game code uses the term unlink to describe this process, so a soft deleted sim is flagged as unlinked. This is the terminology I will be using for the rest of this explanation. To best demonstrate the differences between unlinking a sim in-game and improperly deleting a sim either externally or via that cheat, these ladies have kindly volunteered to show what happens to Sims data depending on how they are deleted. For science. neighbourhoods. Here we have Unlink Me and her sister Delete Me. Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's almost like these Sims were created just for the purposes of this experiment. Unlink Me jumps in the taxi and heads to her her new home, the Sim bin. Once there, I do what I and many others once believed was the Sims 2 equivalent of pushing a big red button and eternally dooming a neighbourhood. I click on the trash can and delete her. Immediately, we can see the neighbourhood did not combust. But what else can we notice in game? Let's head over to Unlink's sister, Delete Me's lot, to check the damage. Or, spoiler, lack thereof. Although Unlink has been removed from Delete's relationships array, Unlink still remains in Delete's family tree where they are correctly connected as sisters. Already we can infer a few things. First, Unlink still has her name and thumbnail, so her user file in the neighbourhoods characters folder must both still exist and contain important and necessary data, and second, the family ties are intact. These are some early indications that despite being seemingly deleted, references and data pertinent to our sim Unlink are still valid. Delete also has a memory of her sister growing up well. Once again, this indicates Unlink's name and thumbnail as well as her NID have been preserved, because this memory still points to her. It's crucial that Unlink's NID remains hers. So let's just confirm that her NID has not been released by hunting down her sim description record in the neighbourhood package. As expected, Unlink's sim description and the data within it still exists. So her NID or the instance of her sim description record remains valid, as do any references also pointing to this number, such as in the neighbourhood memories resource. Similarly, other records in the neighbourhood linked to her via her NID, such as DNA and Wants and Fears, are still correctly assigned to her. There is no chance that any new sim could generate with this number and inherit all its data because she's backseated it. It's hers forever and it's not going anywhere. In SimPE, Unlink's thumbnail now has a blue background, meaning she is flagged as unlinked. This is a Boolean variable, which means there are only two possible values, either true or false, with 0 representing false for not unlinked, which is the default, and 1 representing true. This sim is indeed unlinked, and this flag seems to tell the game to treat the sim as if they have been fully deleted without the risks of actually fully deleting them. April Black compares it to the Boolean is deleted, which is utilized in other applications and databases to flag an entry as deleted in soft deletion. SimPE also marks Unlink as having no character file. However, this does not mean her actual user file in the characters folder is missing. Unlink's family instance is now 0, so she has been moved into the default household. Initially, I assumed this was the only reason why Unlink was removed from Delete's relationships panel in-game. However, it turns out their relationship records have actually been deleted from the Sims Relations resource in the neighbourhood, probably since this information is no longer needed, while relationship information like the family ties is still necessary for references to work. Finally, let's examine her user file that is still present in the neighbourhoods characters folder, albeit in a reduced format. Unlink's file has been reduced to a stub file. As a result, the size of her file has gone from around 205 kilobytes to just under 27 kilobytes. This is because all but 6 resources have been removed from her file. The removed resources are mostly 3D and Edith ones, with Edith being a Maxis-made developer tool used to program objects for the first 2 Sims games. These are no longer necessary when a sim is unlinked because they're not intended to be playable anymore. The remaining resources contain important information that allows the sim to still have UI representation. For example, the catalog description stores the sim's full name and bio, the image resource contains the sim's thumbnail, and the object data also references the sim's first name as well as their GUID, also known as their sim ID. Within the object data, unlinked sims like UnlinkMe have their object types change from 2, representing person, to 11, which SimPE lists as unknown. Chris Hatch, who has updated SimPE, states that this is how the game primarily defines a sim as unlinked, and in conjunction with the unlinked attribute in a sim's person data being set to 1, it confirms they have been marked as deleted and are fully considered to be unlinked by the game. A sim could be flagged as unlinked in their person data, which is the case for a few ancestors in the base game hoods, but they may not actually have undergone the full unlinking process because they haven't been deleted. Shortly after the release of Nightlife, Maxoid Tom shared that certain base game ancestors, who were maybe not in the most resurrectable shape once resurrection was available, were supposed to be marked as unlinked, despite having gravestones. But the flag was not set, leading them to be easily resurrectable in-game, when this probably was not always a good idea. This was corrected with Open for Business. In SimPE, these sims are typically just marked as unlinked, whereas soft deleted sims are also listed as having no character data due to the removed resources in their user files. In both cases, the background of their thumbnails will be blue, because blue overrides the red background, indicating an incomplete character file. Sorry, confusing, and there are some odd exceptions like Merry Melons or Glabe Curious in Strangetown, who are, Schrodinger's unlinked. But let's just focus on our unlinked sim for now, since we can verify unlink has been deleted and thus is fully unlinked by the game's definition. For extra assurance, let's just consult our good friend Hoodchecker to ensure any and all existing references to unlink in the neighbourhood are valid. Sure enough, we get a clean bill of health. Unlink may be unlinked, but she's not invalid, and although she exists now as a bare-bones stub file, she has not been shredded, leaving behind references, floating around like shrapnel, searching for a new host, and most crucially, there is no risk of a new sim snapping up her nID and attached data. This is all normal, intended game behavior, and it is the best way that sims can be deleted without causing neighborhood corruption. Depending on who you ask, unlinking sims is pointless at best if your goal is to completely eradicate them, and at worst it's messy, and making it a habit is not recommended because unlinked sims and stub files still contribute to the overall neighborhood population. Although most ancestors in the premade hoods, particularly the 3 from the base game, were soft deleted in development, there are no unlinked sims in Bluewater Village. So yeah, I appreciate this is an incredibly convoluted explanation just to say, oh, by the way, this isn't completely relevant to Bluewater Village. However, I did feel it was necessary to acknowledge the misinformation my previous videos have contributed towards and rectify my errors by clarifying that unlinking or soft deleting sims is not what this section is going to be referring to. So, what am I referring to? Let's head back to the me household where our sim Delete Me will kindly and voluntarily contribute to our investigation by allowing me to improperly delete her. I opted to manually externally delete her user file from the neighbourhoods characters folder rather than using the cheat since, well, the cheat is self-explanatory. Immediately, her sim description can still be found in SimPE, although it is now listed as unknown. Instead of only removing unnecessary resources from the character file and preserving all required resources necessary for references to the sim to work and remain valid, deleting a sim's user file of course means all of these resources, both necessary and unnecessary, are now completely gone. So without a catalogue description, a deleted sim can't have a name, and without the image resource, they can't have a thumbnail either. Hence, Unlink's memory of her sister growing up well, now pointing to Nervous's long-lost relative, simoleon signed subject whose thumbnail is blank. Hood Checker will flag this missing character file because it is designed to throw an error when it finds sim description records in the neighbourhood that do not have accompanying user files in the characters folder. This warning may be more commonly seen with your own games if you have downloaded any custom NPCs such as Pollination Technicians, because their character files are in the downloads folder and Hood Checker only scans a neighbourhood package. In that case, it's absolutely nothing to worry about, but of course we can verify that this particular warning here is definitely correctly identifying a missing user file because we deleted it. See, here's video evidence. While a good sign ordinarily, a lack of this sim has no user file warning in Hood Checker does not necessarily always suggest a sim's user file wasn't deleted, especially when it comes to neighbourhoods like the premade ones where we aren't privy to everything that happened during their development. This is because upon reloading the neighbourhood, the sim description belonging to the sim whose user file was deleted will automatically be removed as well. This consequential removal of the sim description record, however, poses a problem because sim data is never just confined to their individual user files and corresponding sim descriptions in a neighbourhood. Neighbourhood data is relational, meaning entities connect to and have relationships with other entities. Mutilda explains this by using the example of the sim relations resource in a neighbourhood. We have two sims, Jim and Sally, who have an in-game relationship with one another. Instead of Jim and Sally's individual files containing all the information about the other sim, on top of all the information about their relationship, a new record is created called Sim Relations that stores their relationship information from the daily and lifetime values to any relationship flags. This record then links back to Jim and Sally's files by referencing the instances of their sim description records, their nIDs. The instance of these relationship records combine both Jim and Sally's nIDs in order to reference them. Sim relations are not the only resource in which sims are referenced, however. Sims exist and are referenced in several resources across the neighbourhood, namely Sim DNA, Sim Wants and Fears, Sim Scores, as well as existing in relation to other sims not only via relations, but also in memories, family ties, and even their wants and fears. Traces of sims can be found all over the neighbourhood, and all of them reference the sim via, you guessed it, their NID. Recently, I began studying database design and SQL, and the concept of relational databases really captivated me because they reminded me a lot of a neighbourhood package file in The Sims 2. In a relational database, data organised in columns and rows is stored across multiple tables that are linked to one another using related key fields. So a simple relational database could consist of a parent table which may store some basic information about, say, you know what, let's take this literally and create a table with the columns parent ID, parent name, plus just an extra address column to fill the space. After inserting some rows, we can go ahead and create another table, which we will call children because it's a child table. Get it? In this table, we have the columns child ID, parent ID, and also some extra columns for child name and gender, again just to fill it out a bit. Note how both of these tables have a field called parent ID sharing the same values. This is how we can link the two tables and create a relationship between them. The parent ID column in the parent table is what is known as a primary key. This constraint uniquely identifies each row or record in a table and as such enforces entity integrity, which requires every row must have a unique identifier that cannot be a null value. In SQL, a null value refers to an unknown or otherwise non-existent value. Null doesn't necessarily mean zero or an empty string, instead it represents missing information. A primary key can't be a null value because it needs to be unique. In the child table, the parent ID column is a foreign key, meaning it references the same column from the parent table, and so a relationship has been established between the two tables. The child table is dependent on the parent table. While primary keys enforce entity integrity, foreign keys enforce referential integrity, which is concerned with the accuracy and consistency of data in a database and ensures the records in the child table correspond to a valid record in the parent table, so that there are no discrepancies or inconsistencies and orphan records. So referential integrity can be violated when a record in the parent table is deleted, but a corresponding record referencing its primary key value as a foreign key in a related table still exists, meaning the link has been broken and the reference is invalid, resulting in inconsistent and incomplete data. The child has lost its parent, hence the term orphaned records. Both primary and foreign keys are concerned with enforcing data integrity. Sounds familiar, right? This concept is quite similar to how a neighbourhood stores sim data. In terms of a neighbourhood package, the parent entity would be a sim, in particular their character file or sim description record. Most basic information about a sim is stored in their sim description, from their personality and career to their aspiration and interests. But the rest of their information is spread across the neighbourhood. So in order to access data like a sim's relationships, DNA, wants and fears, or memories, you would have to open other files in the neighbourhood outside of their sim description. So while a sim's, say, DNA is stored in a file separate to their sim description, it is still linked to it because the instance of the DNA record corresponds to the instance of their sim description. This is also true for the other records pertaining to sim data in a neighbourhood. So we can say the nID, the instance of a sim description, is the primary key here, and because other records reference this ID to connect the different records together, then we have a pretty textbook example of a primary key foreign key relationship. But because I'm not an expert, just an enthusiast, I wanted to be sure that this comparison to relational databases and application of database theory were relevant and accurate, especially considering the complexity of The Sims 2. So I reached out to April Black over on Reddit, who was absolutely wonderful and confirmed my thoughts, as well as sharing incredibly valuable information with me for this explanation. April listed 2 main reasons demonstrating how neighbourhood data is relational. First, she cited the inflexibility and highly structured nature of neighbourhood data, as well as the fact that, quote, information about a single sim is split into multiple files inside the neighbourhood package, as we have discussed. To access a sim's memories, for example, you would need to open another file, namely the neighbourhood memory resource, because memories aren't stored in sim descriptions, but they are linked to sims via their nIDs. Though sim data is stored in multiple different files across the neighbourhood, in SimPE you can quickly access other records associated with a sim through their open sim descriptions. So for example, instead of needing to manually find a particular sim's DNA record in the neighbourhood sim DNA resource by searching for the entry with the same instance as their sim description, you can just click on the More tab and choose the DNA option, which will direct you to the correct entry in the neighbourhood sim DNA resource. Of course, it's important to remember that SimPE is a fan-made tool designed for modders and players, and so how SimPE presents game data may not be exactly how Maxis might have organised it. SimPE displays data in a similar way to a database, that is, in tables. While SimPE is one of the very few ways we can poke around with the game files without access to the source code, it may not always accurately or fully represent how some aspects of the game work and how the game manages data. However, in the second reason, April revealed that through working on a new version of Hoodchecker, she can confirm that the game does indeed store information about sims by referencing them via their nIDs pretty much everywhere. To demonstrate this, she used the example of family ties and how, along with a family tie type, she will receive a subject nID and a target nID. So like a sim A and sim B. To find out which sims the subject and target are referencing, April needs to locate the sim descriptions with matching instances. As April says, that is a primary foreign key relationship. Okay, we're finally gonna get to the point I'm trying to make now. A sim is the parent entity. Improperly deleting them may remove their sim description record and delete the nID. For other records referencing the instance of this now deleted sim description have not been deleted automatically. These sim references are now invalid then because they no longer refer to an instance of a valid existing sim description. When dealing with relational data, deleting a parent entity but keeping the related rows in the child tables leads to orphaned records and violates referential integrity. Most database management systems will throw an error if you attempt to delete a record in a parent table without deleting rows in any child tables that reference it as a foreign key. Remember, I've had to forcibly and most importantly externally delete the Sims user file. The game itself would not allow me to delete just one sim this way. It's difficult to predict exact problems that may occur due to these invalid references, especially when it comes to long-term play. But based on the observations, research and testimonies from the community, it seems the most problematic references are ones pointing to what Pescado eloquently dubs as Garbagespace. That is, references relating to other sims, particularly living and playable ones, that remain intact even though the reference sim has been deleted. So now the deleted sim has been reduced to Garbagespace. They point to nothing, basically. These references would include family ties, possibly sim relations, memories, and even references to deleted Sims within existing Sims wants and fears records, either in the form of wants or fears pointing to a particular Sim or references to them in the wants history, as this does not get wiped automatically either. A Sim's wants history contains previous fulfilled wants, triggers, and general information that decides future wants. For example, Stephen Tinker's wants history notes that he has a daughter, Melody, who has become a teenager, which triggers a want for Melody to be an overachiever. It makes sense that these particular references to improperly deleted Sims would be the most concerning, because it could be a likely way of the game trying to access data, perhaps assuming and expecting it to be valid, only for the reference to be dangling and thus invalid. A dangling reference is one that once referred to a valid object, only the object no longer exists, either because it was deleted or destroyed, or the memory has since been freed or deallocated. But the pointer is still doing what it's designed to do, point to a memory address that may not contain the same data as before, assuming it's valid and correct still. Attempts to dereference a dangling pointer or access the stored data is undefined behavior in C++, which is the language the Sims 2's main engine was written in, meaning the results are unpredictable and often undesirable. In terms of The Sims 2, Chris Hatch, who agrees that improper sim deletion can cause hood corruption, mentions that not only is it pretty bad that all references to a deleted sim become incorrect, but also, quote, damaged family ties can even cause the game to freeze or crash. It's why even when following the deleted 2 method of full sim deletion, which requires manually deleting most leftover references in SimPE, it's not advised to delete Sims who have ties to living playable Sims, unless the family ties are fully severed prior to deleting a Sim this way. An interesting case study, I guess you could say, in invalid references comes from Mutilda, who reported constant errors with the wants controller that rendered a family unplayable when she deleted a pet in a household. While pets technically aren't Sims, since they're, well, animals, they do have Sim descriptions and thus an nID that can be referenced across resources and records in the neighbourhood package. So deleting pets yields the same results as deleting Sims. The wants controller is based on the wants history in the wants and fears records for each Sim, which in this case contained references to a now deleted pet. The game is probably getting the information that this household owns a pet, and as a result is trying to roll wants related to this pet based on wants trees that start with obtaining a pet, not realizing the references are invalid since poor little Rover or Mittens was sent to the void, thus causing the controller to fail, manifesting in an object error. As Mutilda points out, the problem is not with the wants controller itself, because that's working how it's supposed to. So resetting or deleting the controller won't fix the errors. Mutilda did find that she could solve the immediate issue by deleting the affected Sims wants and fears records, since these will regenerate. But doing this reverts Sims to straight out of cast generic wants, and they will lose all their wants histories and training that makes them want what they want and fear what they fear. So it's of course not a perfect solution. Sure, this hiccup may not be game breaking or signal the total end of a neighbourhood, but it certainly sounds like undesirable behaviour, particularly since Mutilda reported the issue persisting even when playing other lots. I did attempt to replicate this 3 times in my own game, mostly to hopefully reproduce the failure of the once controller, as Mutilda doesn't go into detail about the object errors she experienced, so I could poke around in the stack traces for this video. For the first attempt, I headed to Pleasantview and deleted John Burb because of both his prominence in wife Jennifer and daughter Lucy's wants histories, as well as the fact that Lucy already had wants to be friends with John and to play with him, and I wanted to see how the game dealt with that, in the case of John being improperly deleted. Interestingly, when I loaded the Burb household after deleting John, the wants relating to him that Lucy had were replaced with a want to make a friend that didn't specify a sim and a new want to gain a skill point. I tried fulfilling wants as well as using the bat box to re-roll them for both Lucy and Jennifer in the hopes that the wants controller would try to access their wants histories and roll new wants pointing to John, but to no avail. In the second attempt, I went over to Desiderata Valley and deleted Pauline Asper because both her grandfather Louis and her father Victor already had wants relating to her. Plus, she was referenced across the wants histories of each sim in her household. And with her father being a family sim, I figured that would increase the chances of triggering the relevant parenting wants tree. Alas, Louise's wants about Pauline automatically changed to getting jobs in certain careers, while Victor just wanted a new baby. Oof. Again, I tried fulfilling or re-rolling wants with the bat box, but I was unable to reproduce any errors. Finally, I decided it would make sense if I tried to delete a pet like Mutilda did, in case that would get me closer to a more accurate replication. I deleted Porthos Roseanne from the pet Stealthhood, because again he's referenced in Cid's wants history and Cid has some wants to teach Porthos commands as well. The game once again handled the deletion quite well. Cid simply snapped out of playing with the now deleted Porthos when I reloaded, and his wants changed to the usual get a job ones. I kept fulfilling and re-rolling wants again, but annoyingly most of Cid's wants were to buy things, since Sims tend to roll these wants more commonly the more often you fulfill them. Anyway, the absolute closest I got to some recognition of owning a pet was a want to buy a pet dish. Assuming this want appears as a result of pet ownership, I checked the wants trees package and confirmed that this particular want is part of the wants tree triggered by a pet joining the family, which is still in Cid's wants history, albeit pointing to a now non-existent nID. But this isn't exactly a big problem. In Mutilda's case, the problem with the wants controller occurred immediately after deleting a pet. However, as she points out, it may not necessarily always be immediate for others. So it's better to be safe than sorry. While my investigation into this showed the resilience of the game and its impressive handling of references to improperly deleted Sims in other Sims Wants and Fears records, I didn't play the households for very long, so your experience may be closer to Matilda's than mine. Now, there is of course another potential problem with improper sim deletion that shaped so many of the corruption horror stories over the years, but we're getting there, kids. We're getting there. Let's go back to our guinea pig Delete Me to see which references and records she's left behind. First, I just want to go over the hood checker report after deleting her user file, but before her sim description is removed as well. Though it is aware Delete's character file is missing, hood checker does not pick up up any invalid relationships, family ties, or wants and fears records referencing delete yet. Presumably because at this point she still has some semblance of a sim description, so technically her NID is still valid-ish. It's still considered taken, at least. Interestingly though, Hoodchecker has flagged the memories where delete is the subject as being invalid, with the warning being subject does not exist. To be completely honest, I am not entirely sure why these have been picked up prior to the removal of delete sim description when other references haven't been. After reloading the neighbourhood and letting the game remove delete sim description, let's run Hoodchecker again and see what it finds now. Note how the user file warning no longer appears due to the now deleted sim description. Keeping on the topic of memories, we already know that her sister Unlink has a memory of delete growing up well. Only in game it points to an unknown sim with no thumbnail. According to the raw data of this memory, however, it's still pointing to delete's NID of 2C. Only, of course, delete no longer has a sim description record, and thus the subject of Unlink's memory is not a valid sim. Hence, the subject does not exist warning in Hoodchecker, since Hoodchecker defines a valid sim as being one with a character file and sim description. Unlink has two invisible memories pertaining to her deleted sister, where delete is the owner of the memories because she was the one to originally generate them, but they appear in Unlink's memory slot, like gossip memories. The first invisible memory in Unlink's slot refers to her sister kissing Mystery Sim for the first time. Because delete is the owner of this memory, Hoodchecker states that the owner does not exist. Again, because delete's NID in data item 4, the owner field references the instance of a now non-existent sim description record. The other invisible memory is a copy of delete's own memory of herself growing up well, which is a memory about self, meaning the owner and subject should reference the same sim. So the warning for this particular memory is that neither owner nor subject exist. Again, the NID 2C is no longer linked to a valid sim who exists in this neighbourhood. As for relations and family ties, interestingly, when I reloaded the neighbourhood so the game could delete our test subject sim description, it also deleted all the records in the sim relations resource pertaining to delete, similar to what happened with Unlink. However, I also tried manually deleting the sim description myself through SimPE straight after deleting the user file, just in case that made any difference. And it did, not majorly. It just kept delete's relationship records. Manually removing the sim description also didn't seem to delete the sim's memory slot, a slot being the place holding memories and tokens. So Hoodchecker has correctly identified a memory slot and all its contents as belonging to a non-existent sim. The other errors are the same, regardless of how the sim description was removed. Weirdly though, when I reloaded the neighbourhood and entered the me household to allow for the automatic deletion of delete sim description, I guess the game decided to create a few new townies, which isn't unusual when you have empty stealth hoods and don't use anti-towning spawning mods for experiments, but one of these newly created Sims user files apparently was just yeeted somehow, snapped out of existence and got deleted, which I didn't do. The Sim ID doesn't seem to match any custom NPCs, which again I don't use in this save folder anyway, so I am not entirely sure if this is related at all or if it is a side effect of deleting one sim, and in fact I did wonder if it was completely coincidental and just a weird glitch, but this happened a few more times too. And then I realised the missing sims in my hood and the Pleasant View where I deleted John Burb shared the same sim ID. which means they would have to be referring to the exact same sim who's either a custom NPC or a universal NPC whose character data is located in the objects package file, and since I could rule out the former, I went spelunking in the objects package to see if the GUID belongs to the latter. And it does. It's the GUID of template person, except template person is, well, a template and not an actual NPC, I think. For total transparency, I am not sure if their presence in a neighbourhood is dangerous or a problem at all, because I couldn't really find anything about template person anywhere. Hood Checker doesn't even have it added to its list of recognised NPC GUIDs, which would explain the user file warning. And that disappeared upon reloading and saving Pleasant View, indicating the deletion of the bogus sim description, but its other records like Wants and Fears remained. So it had to be some sort of sim. I just don't know if any newly generated sims were actually deleted or somehow reduced to this template as a consequence of improperly deleting one sim in the neighbourhood, so maybe that needs its own investigation. Oof. Whatever the reason, rip in peace to these poor sims. But this ain't about them, okay? So although Unlink now sits very lonely by herself in her family tree following the deletion of her sister, their sibling family tie is still mutually connected according to Hood Checker. As we've heard from Chris Hatch, this could cause problems down the line like crashes, though again during this experiment I was not able to catch any obvious signs anything was wrong. Not in game anyway. SimPE would throw a null reference exception when I tried to open Unlinked slot in family ties, citing that an object was not set to the instance of an object. Makes sense as the family tie isn't referring to a valid sim description anymore. Finally, Hood Checker has found Delete's Orphaned Wants and Fears record, and we can verify its existence in SimPE. Unassigned SWAF records. Unassigned Sim Wants and Fears records will always be titled simply Sim Wants and Fears, whereas a normal valid record will note the sim's name. Of course, as we've covered, no user file and no catalogue description means no name. If we have a look at Unlinked's Wants and Fears record in SimPE, we can see that there are a few references to her fallen sister. She doesn't have any wants related to interacting with Delete, but her wants history does still seem to understand that she had an adult sister. Instead of pointing to a valid sim, however, they reference an invalid nID. Could this cause problems down the line? Possibly, possibly not. Hood Checker also does not check for orphan DNA records, presumably because it isn't recommended or, spoiler, really even necessary to remove them, which I do want to go over shortly. However, we can see in SimPE that Delete has also left her DNA record behind. Similarly, the Sim Scores record, once belonging to Delete, is now listed as just Sim Scores. Again, no name. Sim Scores is a resource that no one seems to fully understand the purpose of, since it stores a mishmash of data from different expansion packs, starting with Open for Business, where it originally just stored employee or business owner status. Then with Pets, it began storing learned behaviors and commands for pets, and then with Free Time, it stores information about best friends forever. It's a weird one. Anyway, in summary, we are dealing with the following orphaned records: SimDNA, Sim Wants and Fears, and Sim Scores, as well as Sim Relations in the case of manually deleting the sim description myself, and references to the improperly deleted sim in family ties and other sims' wants histories. records. Aside from SimDNA, scores, and references to delete in Unlinked's wants history, Hood Checker can remove these orphaned records and mitigate most problems that could potentially arise as a result of these invalid references. I hear you all in the backseat yelling, "Are we there yet?" And I'm very glad to say that yes, children, we are now there, finally. The removal of delete sim description and subsequent deletion of her NID technically would mean that her NID is now available, it's no longer considered taken, it's homeless, and its home of the sim description has been demolished, except there's still some furniture lying about that a new owner can steal. Not a perfect analogy, but shh, I needed to use my creative writing degree for something. I have a sim called DNA in another hood who, coincidentally, also has the NID of 2C, which is totally not confusing. Anyway, she's a family sim whose lifetime one is to reach the top of the education career. I made her to test the infamous inheritance of references in the case of improper sim deletion, in particular DNA and sim wants and fears. So I deleted her, did some magic to ensure the recycling of her NID, and quickly created a new sim creatively called a thief who lived up to his name by stealing the now vacant NID of 2C. Despite being a pleasure sim, a thief also wants to be education minister, which isn't a lifetime one included in the limited list of ones associated with the pleasure aspiration. With an adult sim, this is maybe less noticeable, but if I made sure the new owner of 2C were a toddler or child, then the stealing of the lifetime one is very obvious. Just want to quickly point out that in this case, the new sim has a different aspiration to DNA despite inheriting her lifetime one that is associated with her aspiration of family. Because that information is stored in the person data, so sim description, which of course has been deleted and completely replaced by a thief sim description, whereas a sim's lifetime one is stored in the separate wants and fears record. So similarly, our toddler or child have this lifetime one while still having the correct grow up aspiration. I mostly made DNA because I was interested in orphan DNA records. Hence the very clever name. Remember how I said it wasn't recommended to delete them and that it's not necessary anyway? That's because unlike wants and fears records, they will actually be overwritten rather than inherited if nIDs are reused after improper sim deletion. To verify this, I made DNA heterozygous, so it would be obvious if her genetics were stolen. I then made a thief homozygous with vastly different genes to DNA, but just as Pescado explains, the DNA entry for 2C was overwritten and replaced with a thief's genetics. Pescado has also always been pretty adamant that deleting SimDNA files, even ones belonging to deleted sims, is a very bad thing because it will, in his words, mess up every other DNA and corrupt a neighbourhood's entire DNA record, though he doesn't seem to know exactly why. According to Pescado, it will affect every other existing sim's DNA by erasing their recessive genetics, making them homozygous, and elder sims will have what he deems to be severely corrupted DNA. He didn't go into specifics, but judging by how he describes the effect on recessive genes, it's possible he's referring to the loss of their hair genetics. Sounds familiar, huh? This is exactly what happens to the genetics of individual sims when you delete delete their DNA record and let it regenerate, except this would be on a wider neighbourhood level. Although Theo, the creator of a few SimP plugins, including one that facilitates the deletion of Sims, found that this may not actually be immediate or affect every sim in the neighbourhood unless their households are loaded. Deleting sim DNA constitutes a big fiery ball visible from space in Pescado's eyes because of the neighbourhood data loss. I don't know if it's that serious, but it definitely doesn't sound desirable and seems tricky to fix, and so it's generally been advised to leave orphan DNA records alone over the years, but my attempts to replicate this were actually unsuccessful. I made a family so the child would be heterozygous, and I aged the mother to elder to see if my assumptions there were correct. After deleting a random sim I created, as well as their DNA record, I reloaded my family and saved. But their DNA was absolutely fine. The child was still heterozygous, so he hadn't lost his recessive genes, and his mother's genetics also remained. I don't know if this means this information is outdated, or if maybe speculation somehow snowballed back in the 2000s, because it is true that deleting an existing Sim's DNA record will cause it to regenerate, albeit without recessive genes or correct hair genetics in the case of elders, but I don't know if this will happen to every Sim in the neighbourhood if you delete just one orphan DNA record. I don't see why it would, but still, I don't want to claim removing deleted Sims DNA entries is totally safe, just in case. Regardless, it is true that orphan DNA records will be replaced if the NID is ever reclaimed, otherwise they just seem to be ignored, so again, maybe more investigations need to be done. The orphaned records and invalid references are not exactly floating around waiting for the first toddler or dog to snap them up. As both Chris Hatch and April Black point out, computer data doesn't work like that. But technically, if a new sim were to generate or be created with the exact same NID as our deleted sim, then they technically could inherit some of the orphaned records and invalid references, leading to the textbook hood corruption horror stories of toddlers with lifetime wants and a mortgage. You know, general weirdness like wanting to get married or a sim with a cat as their child in their family tree. You get it, you're picking up what I'm putting down. Although the family tie might actually be one-sided on the non-deleted, non-NID stealer side. And I think it's because the game typically deletes a Sim's family tie slot if they are removed from a hood. So if a new Sim claims the now non-existent Sim's NID, they get a shiny new slot in family ties that overwrites the old one with new values, but the non-deleted Sim still has their same old slot with the family tie that connects to a particular Sim with a particular NID, and that's what gets funky. But note how I emphasized the words technically and if. That's because that scenario is extremely unlikely, maybe even teetering on the edge of impossible. I am hesitant to say it can never ever happen without player intervention, but it is rare and not at all inevitable. And that is thanks to the Saviour that is the Sim Creation Index. This reveal is not super exciting considering I've already mentioned it a few times in this video, and April Black went over it pretty extensively in her video, but it's important, so just pretend this is your first time finding out it exists. index. Each main neighbourhood has a sim creation index responsible for assigning nIDs that will auto-increment by 1 whenever a new sim is created or generated. So if we say the most recently created sim in a neighbourhood has the nID of C3 or 195 in decimal, the index will remember this and assign the following value of C4 or 196 to the next sim, then C5 or 197 to the next, and so on. What this ultimately means is that whether you delete just one sim or all the sims in a neighbourhood, the index will remember the last nID used and keep going up from there, even if that last nID belonged to a now deleted sim and thus is technically available. Say we delete the sim with the nID 61. Though there is no longer a sim occupying that nID, the index will keep progressing, and so the next sim created will take the next available nID, whether that's 62 or wherever the index is. It won't fill in the gaps, basically. And it will just keep going up as normal until it reaches 32,767, which is the hard limit of sim instances, because nIDs are 16-bit signed integers. And all we need to know about that for this explanation is that it means the maximum value is 32,767 or 7FFF in hex. A pretty difficult, if not impossible number to reach naturally through normal gameplay. And as April Black's video proves, this is the limit for the index rather than the total amount of character files in a neighbourhood. So trying to create new sims after setting the index to the maximum value will just result in crashing, regardless of how many sims are actually physically in the neighbourhood. To summarise, the sim creation index is a very reliable safety mechanism put in place precisely to prevent the most concerning consequence of improper sim deletion. We are still currently unaware of any in-game mechanism that may cause the index to spontaneously reset, even with April's extensive efforts and thorough investigation into it. I also do want to stress how unlikely it is that a player might accidentally reset or edit the index somehow. Just by admitting to you all that every time I realised I needed to go and reset the index for this video, yeah, I wanted to give up and start playing The Sims 4 instead. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it isn't something the average player can just do without knowing what they're doing, and it requires a program that even more average players may not use. So, point is, it's highly unlikely that the index will ever reset itself, and it's also highly unlikely that you're just going to click a button to accidentally reset it. So, even if there are orphaned records and dangling references due to improper sim deletion in a neighbourhood, whether it's a pre-made hood or a hood you made yourself, it is super improbable that the deleted sims nIDs will ever be recycled and lead to new sims inheriting some of the data that once belonged to a now non-existent sim. In short, you do not need to be overly worried about this randomly happening to your hoods. In terms of Bluewater Village, there's no evidence of nID recycling, and that makes sense considering its placement in the game's lifespan. Something funky happening to the index could have potentially been more possible with base game hoods like Strangetown, because the sim creation index may have still been in development alongside the 3 hoods shipped with the base game, whereas the later hoods would have a fully functional index in place when they were being created as opposed to just when they were released. Although there is a slight discrepancy between the Bluewater Village templates sim creation index, and the sim description resources. I am just going to preface this by stating that the sim creation index isn't used in subhoods, according to both Pescado and Chris Hatch. It may have one when viewed in SimPE, but the main neighbourhood is the only one that matters, and that goes for anything to do with Sims in a hood. When you add Bluewater Village or any subhood to a primary neighbourhood, all the Sims will get new nIDs anyway, of course thanks to the index doing its job. However, this might be interesting to the 2 people still watching this video, so here you go. Here's some probably unnecessary information. When sorted by instance, the last sim description belongs to a townie known as Zach Wilson in the template. Zach's NID is BB, or 187 in decimal, so you would expect the index to be at BC, or 188, ready for the next sim. However, the index is actually at C3, or 195 in decimal, so the index is 8 nIDs ahead. As we've seen, the index should continue progressing even after sims are deleted. But could that explain the oddity here in Bluewater Village? Well, there's no evidence in the form of orphaned records or invalid references to suggest sims between the last NID and the value in the index ever existed. Unless these 7 sims, and only these 7 sims, were meticulously scrubbed, which isn't totally out of the realm of possibility, of course, but judging by, spoiler, the existence of other orphaned records in Bluewater Village, it's unlikely. But, well, if there were 7 sims between BB and C3 that are now unaccounted for, then that would mean there's no need for concern, because nothing seems to remain of them. However, there could actually be a simpler and more innocuous explanation for this discrepancy. Sims made in Create a Family aren't exactly valid sims until you accept them and they officially become part of a neighbourhood. However, April Black's video demonstrates how when sims are created in Create a Family, their user files are preliminarily created in the neighbourhood's characters folder, but they won't be properly committed until you accept the household and head back to the neighbourhood. If you cancel or delete sims in Create a Family, or if the game crashes, this user file is still created, only to be discarded and automatically removed. Additionally, and this is the important part here, the sim creation index will continue progressing, even if you cancel or delete a sim in Create a Family. I have a personal neighbourhood called SafeSide where I'm absolutely sure I have never ever deleted any existing sims and none have gone AWOL, but there are some gaps in nIDs from where I've cancelled Create a Sim and gone back to the neighbourhood, or the game has crashed when trying to accept a sim, or I just wanted a sim to have recessive genes without adding extra sims to the hood. So I deleted the parents in Create a Family. The only proof that the very concept of those sims ever existed is the gap in nIDs, as they leave no traces or references behind. So it could be entirely possible that the Bluewater Village index is only ahead because some sims may have just never gotten out of Create a Family. Point is, gaps in nIDs or a discrepancy between sim descriptions and the index do not necessarily always suggest improper sim deletion. Besides, an index that's slightly ahead is probably less problematic than one that's behind if sims have been improperly deleted. Still, I wanted to briefly touch upon that because it could also help explain gaps in nIDs in Bluewater Village. That being said, there are some orphaned records in Bluewater Village that may or may not be indicative of improper sim deletion, but I have some kind of bad and good news about that. Let's get the bad news out of the way now. While there are some suspicious unassigned records, namely Want Sim Fear, Sim DNA, and even an orphaned Sim Schools record in the template, upon adding Bluewater Village to a main hood, all of these records and references disappear. Yup. I tested this multiple times and also checked whether this happens with other subhoods like downtown, and it does. I don't know if the game deletes them or ignores them or culls them once Bluewater Village or any subhood is added, but they are nowhere to be found in either Simpy or Hood Checker. So the bad news is that we spent a long time going over improper sim deletion just for some of it to not really matter with Bluewater Village. Go ahead and dislike or leave an angry comment. I don't blame you. But this does mean that the good news and the important news is that even if Sims were improperly deleted during the development of the Bluewater Village template, it doesn't matter because any orphaned records and invalid references aren't carried over once the hood is actually made playable, so there's nothing to worry about. Still, if you're interested in hearing about some of the possibly deleted Sims of Bluewater Village from a purely archaeological perspective, then stick around because there's some cool stuff, I swear. In the Bluewater Village template, there are a total of 77 files in the characters folder, although users 8, 63, 71 and 76 do not exist. So the final character file is for user 80. While missing character files could suggest they were deleted at some point in development, as we've seen with the previous section, it can also be explained by Sims not making it out of Creator Sim, since their character files are created only to be promptly removed upon returning to the neighbourhood. Additionally, unlike with nIDs, there is no index in place to prevent user file names from being reused upon deletion. If you delete the file for, say, user 30, the next sim created or generated will take this number, replacing the previous character file with a brand new one. So with that in mind, it's difficult to judge if sims were improperly deleted solely based on any gaps in character files. That being said, while user file names and nIDs are separate, they are typically more or less proportionate, as April Black points out in her video. So you may expect a sim with one of the first character files to have a lower nID, while also accounting for the fact that universal NPCs will generate in a neighbourhood first and snap up the first possible nIDs, and a sim with a more recently created character file to have a higher nID, aligning roughly with when they may have been created. But in the Bluewater Village template, a lot of sims do not have proportionate file names and nIDs. For example, the owners of the first few character files are townies, despite their nIDs suggesting they were created sometime between the playable and ancestral sims, and playable sims do tend to be the first created in premade neighbourhoods. To further compare, Ancestor Lucy Geek has the file of user 5, but her nID is a lot higher than you may expect, 92, which is 142 in decimal. In my hood safe side, the sim with this same nID is an NPC whose character file is user 115, and the owner of user 5 is my playable sim whose nID is 1B or 27. So, disproportionate nIDs and user files can be a sign of improper sim deletion, but again, again, it's tricky to gauge just from character files alone, so let's further inspect the neighbourhood package file itself instead. According to SimPE, there are a total of 85 sim descriptions in the Bluewater Village template. However, 8 of those belong to universal NPCs whose character data are stored in the objects package file, hence they do not have their own individual user files in the neighbourhoods characters folder. So we are dealing with 85 valid sims in total, with 77 of them being playable, ancestral, townies or non-universal NPCs. However, there are apparently 147 sim DNA records and 111 sim wants and fears records in the Bluewater Village template. A slight discrepancy between these resources is normal, because some universal NPCs may not have certain files. For example, an object NPC like Grim Reaper may have a sim description and wants and fears, but no DNA entry in a hood. Similarly, we can see here in my neighbourhood safe side that another object NPC, Hula Zombie, also has a sim description but no DNA or wants and fears entries. But then surely we would be expecting there to be less DNA and wants and fears records than sim descriptions, not more. Plus, we know that in Bluewater Village, both Jeannie and Elle's DNA and wants and fears entries are absent. So why are there more? To compare, this is Bluewater Village added as a subhood to a completely empty primary hood with absolutely no townies, NPCs or stealth hood sims, though there are some additional sim descriptions for object NPCs added with EPs after Open for Business since I play the Ultimate Collection. Still, even with these extra sim descriptions, there are less DNA and wants and fears entries as is typical for most neighbourhoods, because as we've seen, all the junk and orphaned records are not carried over once Bluewater Village is actually made playable. The character files and nIDs will also change to reflect the main neighbourhood's ID and index anyway. But we're treasure hunters who care about these forgotten potential sims and all the wonderful and wacky remnants of development. So let's wade through the junk in the Bluewater Village template. So the template has quite a few gaps in nIDs here and there, which, yes, in some cases could totally just be down to creator sim getting cancelled. However, as we've seen, those sims do not leave any other traces such as orphaned records behind. And most of the missing nIDs in the template have unassigned records associated with them. So we could be dealing with some good old improper sim deletion here. The first 12 orphaned wants and fears records would fill the considerable gap in nIDs between playable sims Florence Della Rosa and the Tinker family, while the rest are scattered almost randomly, and there are even more DNA records assigned to nIDs with no corresponding sim description all over the hood. If they did indeed belong to now non-existent sims, some nIDs have an associated sim DNA record but no wants and fears entry, hence the sim DNA resource containing the most files out of scores, sim descriptions and wants and fears. The orphaned wants and fears records seem particularly interesting, mostly because of the wants histories that we can use to gather information about potential sims who never shipped with the completed Bluewater Village for whatever reason. However, before we do that, I do want to share the theory April Black puts forward in her video, as well as a post on Mod the Sims that suggests the game may sometimes create junk wants and fears records that aren't associated with any existing sim without the index progressing, meaning these unassigned wants and fears records can be claimed by new sims, thus replicating the infamous toddlers with lifetime wants weirdness, even though no sims were ever improperly deleted or in fact created in the first place. just their stray wants and fears. April discovered this glitch in her own neighbourhood, where 259 unassigned wants and fears records were created seemingly out of nowhere. Only no character files were missing, and no new Sims had generated alongside these entries. She noticed the index had not progressed either, leading to new Sims and even pets inheriting the dangling wants and fears. Shortly after releasing her deep dive into corruption, April posted an update on the Sims 2 subreddit where she revealed that she had been able to identify these random unassigned wants and fears as belonging to the stealthhood Sims based on their wants histories. Except the stealthhood Sims were not actually added to the neighbourhood at all, just their wants and fears. This would mean that the records aren't exactly created at random because the data's coming from somewhere, but why or how this glitch happened exactly, however, is another mystery right now. The first stealthhood was not introduced until the Pets expansion pack, which is the next EP released after Open for Business, so in Bluewater Village's case, the Orphaned wants and fears are unlikely to originate from stealthhoods, although we do know the infrastructure for pets was already in place according to Jake Simpson, who was the lead simulation and tools engineer for The Sims 2. So it might not be completely impossible. The object NPC template dog is even in the Bluewater Village template, for example. I mention all this not to debunk or discredit the theory that the game may create unassigned wants and fears records for whatever reason, because it's absolutely still a possibility, especially in players' own hoods where we can be certain no Sims were ever improperly deleted. I can even attest to it as well, because I've also encountered orphaned wants and fears appearing out of nowhere with no other records indicating a Sim with that nID ever existed over the years that I could just not explain or trace back anywhere. It's definitely not a theory that can be ruled out. Still, let's see what we can find buried in the orphaned wants histories of the Bluewater Village template, because they belong to non-existent Sims, whether those Sims were deleted or simply never existed in the first place. And I think that's groovy. Plus, it doesn't really matter either way since, of course, they are nowhere to be found once Bluewater Village is made playable, and thus are nothing to worry about, so we might as well start digging. For the most part, a lot of the 35 unassigned wants and fears entries are pretty generic ones that don't really tell us much about whoever is supposed to have owned them. A few of them have some wants, fears, and a lifetime want, but very limited histories consisting only of the is born trigger. These entries are quite similar to existing adult townies in the Bluewater Village template, so it could be possible that they might have belonged to townies who no longer exist. Others have some fears and a lifetime want, but no wants on top of similarly limited histories. And then there's a handful of entries that consist of nothing but the is born trigger, which interestingly April Black describes as the typical setup for pets wants files in her Mod The Sims post. However, among this graveyard of wants and fears is a cluster of nIDs that appear to have once belonged to a family of 3. According to their wants histories, 1E and 1F were a married couple, and 20 was their child. Going off 20's lack of lifetime want, this Sim is unlikely to have been older than a child. Something interesting interesting about these wants histories, suggesting 1E and 1F were married with 20 as their child, is that these relationships do not seem to be reflected in the family ties resource. Hood checker does not detect any family ties between Sims who do not exist in the Bluewater Village template, so they may have been severed at some point, either prior to or after deletion. When I tested to confirm whether removing family ties affected wants histories, I found what I expected. They don't. I also used the Sim Blender mod to clear family ties in game and got the same result. Hood checker and SimPE also do not pick up on any stray sim relations that verify this non-existent family's relationships with one another. In fact, there are none at all in Bluewater Village, so I won't go into the explanation of hood checker mistaking object IDs for nIDs in this video since it's not relevant, but it will definitely be more relevant in future installments. In the meantime though, you can check out April's coverage of this phenomenon in her Corruption deep dive if you're interested. During an online chat that took place shortly after the release of Open for Business, a fan asked the Maxis team whether they create pre-made families from scratch the way a player would, or if they use, in their words, special programs. Senior producer Don Labs responded, "We use special programs." Which is pretty vague, but the point is that it's plausible that if these particular Sims existed and had the family ties listed in their wants histories, the ties may have been removed externally in development using some kind of internal package editor similar to the fan-made tool SimPE, but probably more advanced, which would not automatically update the wants files. This makes sense since the two resources aren't related. So alterations to one of them may not be automatically reflected in the other. Another little tidbit I found cool was how, judging by their lifetime wants of graduating 3 children from college and reach golden anniversary, the 2 adult Sims most likely both had the family aspiration. But besides 1E wanting to gain a skill point and 1F wanting to have a baby, the adults mostly wanted to buy pretty basic objects, namely a fridge, shower or bathtub, and a toilet. These wants are commonly the first ones a Sim will roll upon moving into an empty or sparsely furnished lot. According to their histories, however, it seems they remember buying certain objects before. So I searched the GUIDs for the objects listed in the first argument using the semantics resource finder in SimPE, and it turns out they bought a cheap counter, desk, chair, and a computer. Now, this is purely conjecture on my part, my theory, conspiracy, allegedly, but personally when I am testing for my videos, I tend to move Sims into empty lots and then buy particular objects I may need, such as a computer, and I tend to just go with the first ones available. These would be the cheapest items because buy mode objects in The Sims 2 are sorted in price order from cheapest to most expensive. So I've been wondering if possibly, potentially, these Sims were used to test new features in game during the development of Open for Business. Again, totally conjecture because my testing process is definitely not reflective of Maxis, and I invite you all to share your own theories in the comments. It's just something I noticed and wondered about and wanted to share in case it was anything interesting. So you may have recognized the nID 1F since that's actually already popped up here and there in this section. That's because the Orphaned Sim Scores record is associated with that now invalid nID. The 3 3 valid Sim schools records belong to the business owners of Bluewater Village, with the exception of Gilbert Jacquet, who owns J'adore Bakery. I am not entirely sure why that is absent. In the context of businesses, Sim scores seem to store information about business rewards, and the fact 1F apparently had this file makes me wonder if they maybe were used to test the new business ownership features, or if they were featured in promotional material at some point and then removed for whatever reason. But again, that's just a theory, a game theory. There's no business info record supporting the possibility of any business being owned by 1F, but this could just be due to the potential owner being deleted and the lot no longer existing. There are also no references to starting a business in 1F's wants history either, which actually isn't unusual because other business owners such as Florence Della Rosa also don't have anything mentioned in theirs. 1E, 1F and 20 do come in between the first playable Sims Florence and the Tinker family, with their nIDs of 30, 31 and 32 in decimal, suggesting they were created quite early on. So if they did indeed exist once upon a time, then perhaps they were prototypes or test subjects. Again, this is total speculation on my part, since nothing much remains of these 3 Sims except their Orphaned Wants and Fears, DNA and 1F Sim scores record, so please feel free to come up with your own theory. A game theory. Scrolling further down the Orphaned Wants and Fears, I noticed another cluster of unassigned records that seem to be related to one another. There are 9 in total, starting from the nID 74 or 116 in decimal to 84 or 132. So while their wants records appear consecutively, there are a few gaps in nIDs whose records are unaccounted for here. All of their wants histories seem to suggest these 9 records belong to deceased elders created together or at least around the same time. 74 and 75 consider one another Cas roomies, implying they were created together but any relationships were not set, whilst 7D and 7E interestingly appear to be married, or at least intended to be according to their wants histories. Although, as with 1E and 1F, this relationship does not seem to be reflected in other relevant neighbourhood resources, namely family ties and sim relations. 80, 81, 82, 83 and 84 list each other as Cas roomies also, and they are all single. Initially, I wondered if maybe they were perhaps created as ancestors for other Sims who ended up getting deleted for whatever reason, until one day it hit me. There are 9 of these orphaned wants files. 9 deceased ancestors, all of them elders. And that was when I realised, actually, these could be accounted for, as they didn't belong to Sims whose character files were deleted, rather they were the original wants records for the 9 ancestral Sims in Bluewater Village whose sim descriptions were lost somehow. When a Sim loses their sim description for whatever data loss related reason, as long as they still have their user file in the neighbourhoods characters folder, then a new sim description will be generated for them, albeit with default person data values, which we have seen in the case of 9 ancestral Sims in Bluewater Village. With a new sim description comes a new nID, because of course nIDs are primary keys and thus need to be unique and never repeated, and the neighbourhood sim creation index will make sure of that. So a shiny new sim description with a new nID to boot necessitates the creation of new associated records, which will also be more like placeholders. So a new DNA record for them will be generated, resulting in the loss of any recessive genes as we've seen, and of course in the case of elders such as the 9 stars of this show, the loss of their hair genetics. Other records, such as their wants and fears, may also follow suit and will be similarly basic, not just due to the loss of the Sims' aspiration data, but also because of the wiping of their previous wants histories. In the 9 ancestral Sims' new but generic wants histories, their living families and connections to other Sims, including their spouses, are now represented, albeit very briefly, having likely been established after the loss of their data. It's a good thing that all those ties and relationships were most likely added after the glitch happened, because otherwise things could be a lot messier. Not corruption or major impending doom messy at all, just a little messy, as new slots for new nIDs would need to be created here and there'd be more invalid references and whatnot connected to playable Sims around the hood that would do with some cleaning, but that's not the case here, so yay. In this situation, the Sims' original records will still exist in the hood, though they are now unassigned and essentially orphaned, similar to what happens when a Sim is improperly deleted. As we've seen, the game chooses not to cascade delete these records in the event of the Sim description being deleted, regardless of whether the Sim's user file still exists or not, so they are left there. The last reminders of who a Sim used to be. I really recommend reading April's explanation of cascading deletes and what that would look like in terms of The Sims 2 and Orphaned records on Mod The Sims when you get the chance. As always, it will be linked in the sources document provided in the description. Just a side note, because this isn't totally relevant to Bluewater Village, but I wanted to reiterate what April talks about in her video about how a Sim losing their Sim description is the only time incorrect subject instance warnings in Hood Checker would be concerning. If any Sim has memories where the subject is supposed to be the affected Sim, then the nID reference would of course belong to the instance of the Sim's original Sim description and not be updated to point to their new Sim description's instance. The subject GUID in the memory will still be correct, however, because that information comes from the Sim's character file, which remained intact and has stayed the same. So the subject should still appear as the same Sim. It's more behind the scenes where it's not quite right. But yeah, not completely relevant here, because these now bogus nIDs aren't referenced in other Sims memories, so the only incorrect subject instance errors Hood Checker flags are due to the typical subhood bug we went over like 2 hours ago. So yeah, these 9 orphaned wants and fears in the Bluewater Village template can be accounted for, and while they don't exactly belong to deleted Sims per se, they are still not carried over once Bluewater Village is made playable, along with all the other orphaned records that are a little harder to trace. The next valid Sims whose nIDs come after these records are in fact the ancestors with their new Sim descriptions and other data. Maybe they were originally created in a similar order, but it's hard to say for sure. You may have been screaming, but Tanny, there are 11 total Sims whose Sim descriptions were lost and regenerated with funky default values. And don't worry, I hear you. I haven't forgotten about Jeannie and Elle. Though there aren't any wants and fears records for the invalid nIDs 76 or 7F, there are DNA records with data lining up with Elle and Jeannie's appearances. 76 had light blue eyes, red hair, and the first skin tone exactly like Elle, while 7F had grey eyes, black hair, and the third skin tone the same as Jeannie. However, the facial features aren't identical. These nIDs of 76 and 7F, or 118 and 127, place them right with the potentially original nIDs of the 9 funky ancestors, so it is possible these were Elle and Jeannie's original nIDs before whatever glitchy funkiness happened. There are just no wants records we could use to further confirm the theory by checking their histories and deducing their ages, so so it really is just that, a game. But wait, there's just one last thing I want to share before we wrap up this segment and move on to the overall conclusion. If you open lot packages in a text editor like Notepad, you may find some cheeky little references to existing Sims in the neighbourhood. Or you may even find some cheekier little references to Sims who don't exist. This is how a reference to a non-existent sim called Viola was found in Veronaville. She's mentioned in the file for Lot 45 or 111 Stratford Street, an unoccupied residential lot on the Monty side. According to that file, Viola was user 18, however in the shipped version of Veronaville, this character file belongs to Seth Bowie, a repairman. Additionally, 111 Stratford Street appeared in promotional screenshots prior to The Sims 2's release, featuring recognisable Sims Mercutio and Olivia Monty, as well as an unfamiliar teenage girl. This led to speculation among the community that perhaps she was Viola Monty, a daughter of Olivia and Claudio and sister to Romeo and Mercutio, who was scrapped before The Sims 2 dropped for whatever reason. This mystery could and honestly should be its own video because there's more to explore. This is just an overview. So could there be something similar going on in Bluewater Village? If you open 146 Pebble Drive or Lot 43 in the Bluewater Village template in Notepad, there's a reference to a sim called Adriana. Thing is, though, no one in the template is called Adriana. Do we have another Seth Bowie situation on our hands? Well, Adriana's user file name is pretty garbled in Notepad, reading as 0R5. Of course, no one can have that as their file number, so we're going to have to narrow it down to any user file ending in 5. That leaves us with 8 Sims. Lucy Geek is first at user 5, and Townie Roby Monif is last at user 75. I was instantly suspicious of Lucy because her low character file of 5 isn't proportionate with her higher NID of 92 or 146 in decimal, while the others were fine, suggesting some shenanigans. Was yet another funky ancestral sim going to be at the scene of a crime? That's what I was eager to find out. I then started considering who Adriana could have been if she were indeed another sim lost to the void in development. Was she intended to be playable? Was she a townie or non-universal NPC? Did she live her life like a candle in the wind? To investigate, I decided to check the live package, which can be found under the text folder in the game's default installation directory in program files, among other core game files. This package contains text lists for certain UI text in live, live, leave A mode, like tooltips or pop-ups in Sims panels, as well as lines for the dialogue before and after a sim gives birth. It's also home to 2 text lists consisting of first names of US Maxis team members who worked on the game, one for male and one for female. These are where the game pulls names at random for townies and NPCs from. I went through the text list for female first names and found the name Adriana there. So our Adriana, if she existed, might have been a townie or NPC. Could this elusive Adriana have been created and deleted at some point during development, with the only proof she ever existed being a line in some random lot code? Maybe. Could Lucy Geek or somebody else, because this is alleged, have then swept in and claimed the user file number, which can and does happen, and rarely leaves a trace, except in some cases from the base game hoods and overall isn't a big deal, it's just interesting? Also maybe. Junkie. Enter the mysterious Marissa. Also mentioned in lot 43 is a sim called Marissa, whose user file is equally as garbled as Adriana's, as apparently she was or is user A7. Again, that's not the correct format, so nobody can have cool character files containing funky letters with hats on. It is not allowed. Unlike Adriana, however, there does indeed exist a sim called Marissa in the Bluewater Village template. She's a townie, which makes sense because, actually like Adriana in this case, the name Marissa does appear in the live package, meaning townies and NPCs can generate with this name, the most famous example being Marissa Bendit, a Pleasant View and Custom Hood townie. Moreover, guess what Bluewater Village Marissa's user file is? It's 7. So if we interpret 0A7 as 007, then 0A5 could be 005. Lucy Geek's file number. Has she cruelly snatched our Adriana's identity in a similar manner to Seth Bowie in Veronaville? At the very last minute, I realised some text surrounding the mention of Marissa seemed to confirm her identity as the townie Marissa Creelman, as she is known in the Bluewater Village template. A few lines above Marissa is the name of her everyday outfit, blazer pleats or the blue rebel school uniform, as well as the name of her hairstyle, Paige Punk, in red, matching her appearance in game. So I went back to the reference to Adriana and noticed some very interesting mentions of an outfit and hairstyle. The outfit noted is the paper delivery uniform, while the hairstyle, or rather the hat, is hat ball cap NPC, though the text is a little garbled again, which would of course match the uniform. Fun fact, her hair colour appears to have been black. And that was when it hit me. Typically in a pre-made neighbourhood, there are 3 of each service NPC, including the teenage newspaper delivery NPCs. However, in Bluewater Village, there are only 2. Could Adriana have been the 3rd but was deleted for some reason? I would like to open up the discussion and invite you all to share your thoughts below. So yeah, I haven't seen anything about this mysterious Adriana anywhere before, so I don't know how well known this is, or even if it's as cool to everyone else as it is to me, but I felt it would serve as a fitting segue into the final summary before the conclusion, which I swear we're getting to. Do I believe Sims were improperly deleted during the development of Bluewater Village? Based on the evidence we've covered, it does seem likely, and I don't want to completely rule it out, even if there are records and references that could be accounted for. Bluewater Village wouldn't be the first post-base game hood with traces of scrap Sims. It's not exactly unheard of. Does it matter in that it's something to actively worry about or even avoid playing the vanilla hood altogether? Personally, no, I don't think it is, mostly due to the fact that any orphaned records and invalid references don't seem to make it out of the template, but also because of the sturdiness of The Sims 2 and the reliability of its safety mechanisms, namely the Sim Creation Index. Ultimately, this coverage of potential improper sim deletion occurring in Bluewater Village has mostly just been academic rather than serving as some kind of warning to players. We'll be discussing that a bit more as part of the upcoming conclusion segment, but just quickly before we move on, I would like to give a massive, spectacular thank you to April Black, whose research, hard work and kindness have been beyond invaluable. Without April, this section, if not the entire video, simply could not exist, so I will be forever grateful. I'm sure you already have, but if you get a chance, please send April lots of love, as she is an absolute gem in this community and deserves all the support. If we look at an overview of everything covered in this video and eliminate all the bugs and not corruption, just weirdness, as well as any features that are harmless and lean more into being intentional, then we're really only left with just 2 examples of corruption adjacent funkiness in Bluewater Village. The first, of course, refers to the 9 funky ancestors and Jeannie and Elle's data, or rather lack thereof, because it is indicative of data loss sometime during the hood's development, which is less than ideal. But even then, this could be considered more of a symptom than a cause, as Sims with corrupted data aren't necessarily going to spread their bulkage to other Sims. It's very much confined to these 11 Sims person data. Not to mention they are essentially hidden away in the default household, with the majority of them being deceased ancestors, so that's where they belong anyway, while Jeannie and Elle, who were intended to be townies, are also hidden there, either due to the family instance for the default household being 0, or possibly even having been intentionally moved there at some point, as losing their Sim description does not always automatically throw a Sim in there. Most players will likely never come across any of these 11 Sims in their games, and the sole fact that they exist doesn't mean Bluewater Village is a ticking time bomb. This is also most likely the case even if a player does choose to resurrect these ancestors. In fact, resurrecting buggy ancestors in any pre-made hood, yes, even those ones, is unlikely to bring on a full-scale hood apocalypse, even though you may encounter some bugs and errors that might impact your gameplay and have undesirable effects. So, while the general advice is to let glitchy deceased Sims rest in peace, well, as much peace as their book states will allow, resurrecting them shouldn't condemn your hood to its own grave. If you would prefer to resurrect any of these 9 Sims, ideally in a functional state without the risk of persistent bugs such as any errors caused by their lack of aspirations, then Meet Me to the River has done the hard work for you by blessing them with the gift of complete character data in their fixed Bluewater Village template. However, as mentioned in the original section many hours ago, Meet Me to the River decided to remove Jeannie and Elle entirely, most likely using Pescado's deleted to method. Now, I would like to address the elephant in the room when it comes to the final step of Deleted 2. Its creator, Pescado, proposed resetting the sim creation index back to 1 after following this method to completely and cleanly delete sims in 2006. Pescado suggested resetting the index in order to recycle nIDs, instead of allowing it to, in his words, continue to obliviously count towards certain 16-bit doom, referring to the index's hard limit of 32,767. However, following the release of April Black's Corruption Deep Dive, this step is considered outdated and thus no longer recommended, because it's probably best to leave the index alone to do its job when deleting sims manually, just in case anything's left behind. Not to mention, it's extremely improbable that anyone would ever need to worry about their hood trying to exceed the nID of 7FFF. Though Meet Me to the River did likely use Deleted 2 to remove certain NPCs and most of the townies, including our friends Jeannie and Elle, if we open up her clean Bluewater Village subhood template in SimPE, the value in the index is still at C3 rather than 1, suggesting she did not reset it after mopping the junk up. I also checked the main hood version where the index would be especially important and found the same result. So if that's something you're unsure about, then I hope that information can put your mind at ease. Still, if you would like to play with fixed Jeannie and Elle, or would just prefer to play a clean Bluewater Village with all the sims present, then Croconaw Sims over on Mod the Sims has this available for you as an alternative. The only townies that remain in Meet Me to the River's template have connections to playable sims or businesses either as customers or employees, and so they would be considered unsafe to delete. Croconaw Sims' version restores the other deleted townies. Speaking of sim deletion, let's go back to our overview to discuss the other corruption concern in Bluewater Village. I'm probably sounding like a broken record at this point, but while yes, it is still very much agreed that improper sim deletion is bad and is generally discouraged, the removal of invalid references and records left behind can help mitigate the damage. As we've seen, most evidence of any improper sim deletion occurring in the development of Bluewater Village disappears once it becomes a playable subhood. So if you do have concerns about perhaps having already started a playthrough using the shipped template, then please don't worry, I understand, as you very likely don't need to go and urgently rush to start over again with a clean template. But if you would prefer to have a relatively more bug-free experience with minor gameplay improvements, or for peace of mind if nothing else, then Meet Me to the River has not only made the Bluewater Village ancestors more desirable to resurrect, but she has also tweaked the hood in other ways by giving certain Sims skill points, adding memories, and setting the Tinker's business up with some toys in their inventories. Croconaw Sims also goes one step further by increasing their family funds because the official Prima Guide states that they're supposed to have enough money to purchase the community lot Inner Child toys and gifts. Unfortunately, neither of these versions really fix the not corruption just weird bug of J'adore Bakery selling spoiled and pretty much completely inedible stock, so if you would like to send your Sims there for an actually edible sweet treat, then you'll need to replace it all, which should be a little more doable with Denise's newly given cooking skill points. They have, however, finally given the Townies family a name, since you may have noticed they are lacking one in the original Bluewater Village. As Bluewater Village is a subhood, you'll have to install either Meet Me to the River or Croconaw Sims' template by replacing the original B001 folder in Program Files. Where this is exactly depends on which version of the game you are using, but if you play the Ultimate Collection, for example, then you can find the Open for Business neighbourhood template folder under EP3 in Best of Business. Be careful to not let the new folder overwrite the old, because this will cause problems. Instead, either delete the old folder first or keep it safe elsewhere. Any existing Bluewater Villages added in your game before downloading a clean template will not be affected. Alternatively, if you'd like to play Bluewater Village as a standalone neighbourhood, this is a little more straightforward to install, as you can just plop the BWVM folder into your neighbourhoods folder under Documents. Croconaw Sims also has a main hood version available, however the folder is called N004, so if you already have a neighbourhood using this folder ID that you'd like to keep, then you will have to use a program called Bulk Rename Utility to rename each file that features the folder ID. There's a tutorial over on the Sims Wiki showing how to do this if this is something you would like to do. It's completely understandable if not though. I appreciate a lot of this information, and overall approach to both corruption and glitches contradicts what I have said previously, especially in my oldest videos. Ever since starting this series back in 2021, our opinions on corruption have changed as our knowledge and understanding has expanded thanks to the hard work of the Sims 2 community, and I truly regret being so hyperbolic in the past. I perpetrated myths such as deleting Sims from the Sim bin or selling their graves will cause hood corruption, and made statements like how giving Sims a death token is a surefire way to corrupt your hood without having sufficient evidence to back them up. So I would like to take this opportunity to hold my hands up and admit my mistakes, and most of all say I am sorry for spreading misinformation. I should have been more responsible from the start, and though I hope this video is a step in the right direction, I do believe there are more mistakes I need to keep acknowledging and correcting in the future in order to fully rectify the damage I have caused. There's still some work to be done. Ultimately, not every bug or glitch is a sign of corruption, and a neighbourhood in The Sims 2 is very unlikely to go up in flames just by looking at it funny. Hood corruption really isn't as inevitable as my previous videos misrepresented it, and for that I apologise. Even with these pre-made hoods that do have evidence of corruption shenanigans, you could still get years of play out of them. Honestly, it's more likely that hood corruption, if it does occur for you since it's not necessarily guaranteed, may be caused by factors outside of your control. I don't mean that in a scary, fear-mongering corruption is inevitable and resistance is futile way, but rather because of cases of data loss as a result of the Mac file limit, particularly aggressive antiviruses, modding cloud storage like OneDrive that a 20-year-old program like The Sims 2 wouldn't have accounted for, crashes, and even use of third-party programs. This isn't to put anyone off using SimPE, as it's a fantastic tool, but it can consume a lot of memory, and it's recommended to restart it every now and then if you're planning to use it for any taxing tasks. A while ago when I was setting up memories in SafeSide, SimPE threw an out-of-memory exception when saving that completely destroyed the hood. Afterwards, I couldn't properly open it in SimPE again without errors, and Hood Checker also had to abort the check because the file was totally unreadable. Luckily, I back up my neighbourhoods pretty meticulously, especially when I am about to use SimPE to make major changes, so I lost very little progress. But if I hadn't backed up at all, then my hood would have been irreversibly corrupted and I would have had to start over. You don't have to back up as much as I choose to, but I do 100% recommend you back up your neighbourhoods every so often too. It's not exactly preventative in that it won't stop something similar happening outside or even inside the game, but it means you can restore from a backup and avoid losing tons of progress or your entire save altogether in the event of something unpredictable going wrong. It provides a neat little safety net. It's also recommended that you make exceptions for The Sims 2 in your antivirus, disable OneDrive, and if playing on Mac, be cautious of the file limit. It is true that Sims 2 neighbourhoods are complex, with lots of resources and files, and the way it stores and handles data is different to newer Sims games. Most crucially, neighbourhood data is relational, so it's important that it's all saved and committed properly, and most of the time it will be. If you're new here and coming from 3 or 4, that's just something to keep in mind. A really good habit to get into is saving first and then exiting the game instead of choosing the save and exit option, because sometimes the game can crash while exiting. If you save separately first, then it just decreases the risk of losing data or affecting the hood in case any crash happens. In conclusion, one player's definition of unplayable may differ from the next, so it's difficult to accurately quantify. Sims 2 is a very individual game where no two players are gonna play the exact same way, and it's understandable that the prospect of losing a neighbourhood is devastating because we invest so much time and energy into these little pixel people, but ultimately this game should be fun. That's why I believe in a happy medium, somewhere between the two extremes of complete corruption denial on one end and total fearmongering on the other. We can be conscious of potential problems and how to prevent them, or have steps to deal with them without letting fear consume us. That's the balance I would like to strike with this series going forward. Most of all, glitches and how this game works will always fascinate me. So if you're also curious, then I want this channel to be the right place for you. By the way, I decided against including certain open for business bugs and quirks, such as the infamous tombstones on shelves issue, or Sims losing their eyebrows, a la Olive Spectre's victims when wearing a business uniform, simply because they aren't exclusive to Bluewater Village, and I've taken up enough of your time already. So now go and help poor Denise believe in life after love. Experience customers complaining about dirty plates at the Electronics Supercenter because they use the barbecue to grill hot dogs. Cringe at the carpeted kitchen in the Tinker household. Oh, and while you're at it, can you let me know where the heck Club Dante went? Well, hello again to the lovely 2.5 people still watching this. If you've made it this far, then first of all, why? No, seriously, thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video has had some sort of positive impact on you. So this took a lot longer than I anticipated. Full disclosure, I started this project in 2022 and a lot of what you've seen was completed that year and 2023, with the last few bits done in 2024 and the start of this year, 2025. So yes, the majority was finished before the Legacy Collection was released. And though I honestly haven't really been super involved in the wider Sims community lately because I've just been busy and trying to focus on this behemoth of a video, from what I've heard, there are some new problems and corruption issues. I think April Black has covered it all in a video, but yeah, hopefully this video hasn't already been rendered totally obsolete by the time I upload it. By the way, if you are new here and playing The Sims 2 for the first time because of the Legacy Collection, then hello, welcome. I swear I do not usually take years to upload. So I always planned on taking a short hiatus after the downtown video to focus on other projects before continuing with this series. However, I don't think I was prepared for stuff that came my way that delayed everything even more. I appreciate it's been frustrating and I did consider making a separate video just explaining what's been going on, maybe not in a ton of detail but enough to keep everyone in the loop and chat about the next steps for this channel, but ultimately I decided to just focus on this video instead, say my piece here and work out where to go from here. I know I'm not the only one having a tough time, it's just there's been a lot of upheaval in my life, a lot of changes and challenges, not all bad necessarily, just a lot of new responsibilities on top of health issues, both mental and physical. While I do choose to share some of it, I prefer to keep it as private as possible, especially when it hasn't been about me. It hasn't always been my stories to share, so I hope you can understand that and also refrain from speculation. I'm honestly not that interesting anyway. There have unfortunately been times where I have had to step back from this and prioritize my real life. Things are getting better now, I'm happy to say, but I never want to make promises I can't keep because that's not fair on anyone and life is unpredictable. It doesn't mean I shouldn't try harder, I definitely should and hopefully will from now on, but I do also have to be realistic. I also haven't wanted to rush, or for lack of a better word, half-ass this video because it's really important I get it right. So while I'd never say I'm an expert, I'm a genius, I know everything about The Sims 2 and computers and fun data stuff, because I really do not, but I have tried to take some time out to study or brush up on things like C and SQL as well as semantics, just so that I have a decent foundation to work with and can be more accurate and informative. There's a lot I've had to address and still need to address, of course, and I needed it to be right and something I'm happy with. Every week on Sunday afternoons I upload a community post just so I can provide updates and communicate openly, or as openly as possible, with everyone and not disappear off the face of the earth or go radio silent, because because I know I'm probably never going to be able to have a really regular and consistent upload schedule, unfortunately. I've known that from the start, and it's something I've tried to be transparent about. I wish more than anything that I could make more regular content for you all, but life doesn't always agree with what I want, so yeah, instead I try to check in weekly, talk about The Sims, and provide progress reports, both good and bad. So if you didn't know that, then now you do. Just some notes before I go into the future of this channel and this series in particular. I noticed while editing the conclusion that the Sims Wiki has updated the articles for ancestral Sims without aspirations and removed the inaccurate statements that they have the power aspiration. So while I did do a written disclaimer for that early section going over the differences between power and no aspiration, essentially gently disagreeing with the information available back then, I do also want to verbally acknowledge the correction since that part was completely finished in 2022, and I don't think it's fair on the Sims Wiki if I don't make it clear that it has since updated. Still, I think highlighting the differences are important, but yeah, I don't want to make out like the Sims Wiki still has this information when that wouldn't be true. Shout out to the Sims Wiki and its hardworking contributors. You're a phenomenal resource that I could not do without. Also, I initially thought it'd be funnier to never mention the disappearance of Club Dante, but in the spirit of transparency, I've decided I should at least acknowledge it. Genuinely, I have no idea how it could have disappeared. I did a lot of poking around and moving the neighbourhood template folder in and out and swapping all the different versions multiple times, but I don't know if that could have contributed at all. I could get it back with other versions, so I guess it ended up being another demonstration of the importance of backups. Okay, yes, the future. I'll forever kick myself for not releasing this in 2 parts because I completely underestimated how long the Sim deletion segment would take, and I really should have uploaded that separately. It would have sped things up a lot more. However, the good news is that theoretically the next installments of this series shouldn't take as long as this one did because I have all of that I can refer back to when the relevant topic comes up. Plus, you get 2 videos for the price of 1, so aren't you lucky? There'll be some polls on my community tab coming up soon asking where you would like to go next with this series, so please look out for them. Ideally, I would start all over again and retire the old videos because of the misinformation, but I wanted to at least get this video out first to address things I've gotten wrong before I do anything like that. Just because I don't want to sweep things under the rug, you know, I made mistakes and it's okay to admit that and work on fixing it. I would just like to gauge how everyone feels, and in the meantime I'll work on some more short form content like the PSP playthrough, as well as some other stuff exploring non-corruption bugs and glitches. I'd really like to do another Who Is Sim Anyway video, maybe on Mystery Sim or someone else. It could be Viola or Glabe Curious, I don't know yet. But yes, as far as this series is concerned, I'd like to work out a way to move forward with everyone. Do I start from scratch or keep going and retroactively make corrections like I've tried to do here? And if we do move forward, which hood should come next? Would it be worthwhile making one big video correcting or updating or even just expanding upon the first few videos? Sort of like remastering them all together and correcting everything all at once? We'll see. As much as I want to make content that I'm proud of and satisfied with, you're the ones watching, so I'd like to listen to you and what you'd like to see and go from there. I think I've said everything I've wanted to say now, so thank you so much for your kindness, your patience and your understanding. It has meant the world. I know it's been tough, and it brings me immense joy to finally tell you to stay safe, be good, and most of all, happy simming. Let's meet again much sooner, hopefully.